Chapter 6 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Llewellyn Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 6. Emlyn's Curse. Just before the wild dawn broke on the morrow of the burning of the towers, a corpse, roughly shrouded, was borne from the village into the churchyard of Cranwell, where a shallow grave had been dug for its last home. "Whom do we bury in such haste?" asked the tall Thomas Bull, who had delved the grave alone in the dark, for his orders were urgent, and the sexton was fled away from these tumults. "That man of blood, Sir Christopher Harfleet, who has caused us so much loss," said the old monk, who had been bidden to perform the office, as the clergyman, Father Necton, had gone also, fearing the vengeance of the abbot for his part in the marriage of Cicely. A sad story, a very sad story. Wedded by night, and now buried by night, both of them, one in the flame, and one in the earth. Truly, O God, thy judgments are wonderful, and woe to those who lift hands against thine anointed ministers. Very wonderful, answered Bull, as, standing in the grave, he took the head of the body, and laid it down between his straddled feet. So wonderful that a plain man wonders what will be the wondrous end of them. Also, why this noble young knight has grown so wondrously lighter than he used to be. Trouble and hunger in those burnt towers, I suppose. Why did they not set him in the vault with his ancestors? It would have saved me a lonely job among the ghosts that haunt this place. What do you say, father? Because the stone is cemented down, and the entrance bricked up, and there is no mason to be found? Then why not have waited till one could be fetched? Oh, it is wonderful, all wonderful, but who am I, that I should dare to ask questions? When the Lord Abbot orders, the lay brother obeys, for he also is wonderful, a wonderful abbot. There, he is tidy now, straight on his back, and his feet pointing to the east, at least I hope so, for I could take no good bearings in the dark, and the whole wonderful story comes to its wonderful end. So give me your hand out of this hole, father, and say your prayers over the sinful body of this wicked fellow, who dared to marry the maid he loved, and to let out the souls of certain holy monks, or rather of their hired rufflers, for monks don't fight, because they wished to separate those whom God, I mean the devil, had joined together, and to add their temporalities to the estate of Mother Church." Then the old priest, who was shivering with cold, and understood little of this dark talk, began to mumble his ritual, skipping those parts of it which he could not remember. So another grain was planted in the cornfields of death and immortality, though when and where it should grow, and what it should bear, he neither knew nor cared, who wished to escape from fears and fightings back to his accustomed cell. It was done, and he and the bears departed, beating their way against the rough, raw wind, and leaving Thomas Bull to fill in the grave, which, so long as they were in sight, or rather hearing, he did with much vigor. When they were gone, however, he descended into the hole under the pretence of trampling the loose soil, and there, to be out of the wind, sat himself down upon the feet of the corpse and waited, full of reflections. "Sir Christopher dead," he muttered to himself. "I knew his grandfather when I was a lad, and my grandfather told me that he knew his grandfather, and that his grandfather had known his grandfather's great-grandfather, say 300 years of them, and now I sit on the cold toes of the last of the lot, butchered like a mad ox in his own yard by a Spanish priest and his hirelings, to win his wife's goods. Oh, yes, it is wonderful, all very wonderful, and the Lady Cicely dead, burnt like a common witch, and Emlyn dead, Emlyn, whom I have hugged many a time in this very churchyard, before they whipped her into marrying that fat old grieve, and made a monk of me. Well, I had her first kiss, and by the saints, how she cursed old Stower all the way down yonder path. I stood behind that tree and heard her. She said he would die soon, and he did, and his brat with him. She said she would dance on his grave, and she did. I saw her do it in the moonlight the night after he was buried. Dressed in white, she danced on his grave. She always kept her promises, did Emlyn. That's her blood. If her mother had not been a gypsy witch, she wouldn't have married a Spaniard when every man in the place was after her for her beautiful eyes. Emlyn is a witch too, or was, for they say she is dead. But I can't think it. She isn't the sort that dies. Still, she must be dead, and that's good for my soul. Oh, miserable man, what are you thinking? Get behind me, Satan, if you can find room. A grave is no place for you, Satan, but I wish you were in it with me, Emlyn. You must have been a witch, since, after you, I could never fancy any other woman, which is against nature, for all's fish that comes to a man's net. Evidently a witch of the worst sort, But, my darling, which or no, I wish you weren't dead, and I'll break that abbot's neck for you yet, if it costs me my soul. Oh, Emlyn, my darling, do you remember how we kissed in the copse by the river? Never was there a woman who could love like you." So he moaned on, rocking himself to and fro on the legs of the corpse, till at length a wild ray from the red risen sun crept into the darksome hole, lighting first of all upon a mouldering skull which Bull had thrown back among the soil. He rose up and pitched it out with a word that should not have passed the lips of a lay brother, even as such thoughts should not have passed his mind. Then he set himself to a task which he had planned in the intervals of his amorous meditations, a somewhat grisly task. Drawing his knife from its sheath, he cut the rough stitching of the grave clothes, and, with numb hands, dragged them away from the body's head. The light went out behind a cloud, but, not to waste time, he began to feel the face. "Sir Christopher's nose wasn't broken," he muttered to himself, "unless it were in that last fray, and then the bone would be loose, and this is stiff. No, he had a very pretty nose." The light came again, and Thomas peered down at the dead face beneath him, then suddenly burst into a hoarse laugh. "By all the saints! Here's another of our Spaniard's tricks! It is drunken Andrew the Scotchman, turned into a dead English knight. Christopher killed him, and now he is Christopher. But where's Christopher?" He thought a little while, then, jumping out of the grave, began to fill it in with all his might. "You're Christopher," he said. "Well, stop, Christopher, until I can prove you're Andrew. Goodbye, Sir Andrew Christopher. I am off to seek your betters. If you are dead, who may not be alive? Emlyn herself, perhaps, after this. Oh, the devil is playing a merry game round old Cranwell Towers tonight, and Thomas Bull will take a hand in it." He was right. The devil was playing a merry game. At least, so thought others besides Thomas. For instance, that misguided but honest bigot, Martin, as he contemplated the still senseless form of Christopher, who, rechristened Brother Louise, had been safely conveyed aboard the Great Yarmouth, and now, whether dead or living, which he was not sure, lay in the little cabin that had been allotted to the two of them. Almost did Martin, as he looked at him and shook his bald head, seem to smell brimstone in that close place, which, as he knew well, was the fiend's favourite scent. The captain also, a sour-faced mariner with a squint, known in Dunwich, whence he hailed, as Miser Goody, because of his earnestness in pursuing wealth and his skill in hoarding it, seemed to feel the unhallowed influence of his satanic majesty. So far everything had gone wrong upon this voyage, which already had been delayed 6 weeks, that is, till the very worst period of the year, while he waited for certain mysterious letters and cargo which his owners said he must carry to Seville. Then he had sailed out of the river with a fair wind, only to be beaten back by fearful weather that nearly sank his ship. Item: 6 of his best men had deserted because they feared a trip to Spain at that season, and he had been obliged to take others at hazard. Among them was a broad-shouldered, black-bearded fellow clad in a leather jerkin, with spears upon his heels, bloody spurs, that he seemed to have found no time to take off. This hard rider came aboard in a skiff after the anchor was up, and, having cast the skiff adrift, offered good money for a passage to Spain or any other foreign port, and paid it down upon the nail. He, Goody, had taken the money, though with a doubtful heart, and given a receipt to the name of Charles Smith, asking no questions, since for this gold he need not account to the owners. Afterwards also the man, having put off his spurs and soldier's jerkin, set himself to work among the crew, some of whom seemed to know him, and in the storm that followed showed that he was a stout-hearted and useful, though not a skilful sailor. Still he mistrusted him of Charles Smith and his bloody spurs, and had he not been so short-handed and taken the knave's broad pieces, would have liked to set him ashore again when they were driven back into the river, especially as he heard that there had been manslaying about Blossholme, and that Sir John Fotherell lay slaughtered in the forest. Perhaps this Charles Smith had murdered him. Well, if so, it was no affair of his, and he could not spare a hand. Now, when at length the weather had moderated, just as he was hauling up his anchor, comes the Abbot of Blossholme, on whose will he had been bidden to wait, with a lean-faced monk and another passenger, said to be a sick religious, wrapped up in blankets, and to all appearance dead. Why, wondered that astute mariner Goody, should a sick monk wear harness, for he felt it through the blankets as he helped him up the ladder, although monk's shoes were stuck upon his feet. And why, as he saw when the covering slipped aside for a moment, was his crown bound up with bloody cloths. Indeed, he ventured to question the abbot as to this mysterious matter while his lordship was paying the passage money in his cabin, only to get a very sharp answer. "Were you not commanded to obey me in all things, Captain Goody, and does obedience lie in prying out my business? Another word, and I will report you to those in Spain who know how to deal with mischief-makers. If you would see Dunwich again, hold your peace." "Your pardon, my lord abbot," said Goody, "but things go so upon this voyage that I grow afraid. That is an ill voyage upon which one lifts anchor twice in the same port." "You will not make them go better, Captain, by seeking to nose out my affairs and those of the church. Do you desire that I should lay its curse upon you?" "Nay, your reverence, I desire that you should take the curse off," answered Goody, who was very superstitious. "Do that, and I'll carry a dozen sick priests to Spain, even though they choose to wear chain shirts, for penance." The abbot smiled, then, lifting his hand, pronounced some words in Latin, which, as he did not understand them, Goody found very comforting. As they passed his lips, the great Yarmouth began to move, for the sailors were hoisting up her anchor. "As I do not accompany you on this voyage, fare you well," he said. "The saints go with you, as shall my prayers. Since you will not pass the Gibraltar Straits, where I hear many infidel pirates lurk, given good weather, your voyage should be safe and easy. Again, farewell. I commend Brother Martin and our sick friend to your keeping, and shall ask account of them when we meet again." "I pray it may not be this side of hell, for I do not like that Spanish abbot and his passengers, dead or living," thought Goody to himself, as he bowed him from the cabin. A minute later the abbot, after a few earnest, hurried words with Martin, began to descend the ladder to the boat, that, manned by his own people, was already being drawn slowly through the water. As he did so, he glanced back, and, in the clinging mist of dawn, which was almost as dense as wool, caught sight of the face of a man who had been ordered to hold the ladder, and knew it for that of Geoffrey Stokes, who had escaped from the slaying of Sir John, escaped with the damning papers that had cost his master's life. Yes, Geoffrey Stokes, no other. His lips shaped themselves to call out something, but before ever a syllable had passed them, an accident happened. To the abbot it seemed as though the whole ship had struck him violently behind, so violently that he was propelled head-first among the rowers in the boat, and lay there hurt and breathless. "What is it?" called the captain, who heard the noise. "The abbot slipped, or the ladder slipped, I know not which," answered Geoffrey gruffly, staring at the toe of his sea-boot. "At least he is safe enough in the boat now." And turning, he vanished aft into the mist, muttering to himself, "A very good kick, though a little high, yet I wish it had been off another kind of ladder. That murdering rogue would look well with a rope round his neck. Still, I dared do no more, and it served to stop his lying mouth before he betrayed me. Oh, my poor master, my poor master!" Bruised and sore as he was, and he was very sore, within little over an hour Abbot Maldon was back at the ruin of Cranwell Towers. It seemed strange that he should go there, but in truth his uneasy heart would not let him rest. His plans had succeeded only far too well. Sir John Fothergill was dead, a crime, no doubt, but necessary, for had the knight lived to reach London with that evidence in his pocket, his own life and those of many others might have paid the price of it, since who knows what truths may be twisted from a victim on the rack. Maldon had always feared the rack. It was a nightmare that haunted his sleep, although the ambitious cunning of his nature and the cause he served with heart and soul prompted him to put himself in continual danger of that fate. In an unguarded moment, when his tongue was loosed with wine, he had placed himself in the power of Sir John Fothergill, hoping to win him to the side of Spain, and afterwards, forgetting it, made of him a dreadful enemy. Therefore this enemy must die, for had he lived, not only might he himself have died in place of him, but all his plans for the rebellion of the Church against the crown must have come to nothing. Yes, yes, that deed was lawful, and pardon for it assured should the truth become known. Till this morning he had hoped that it never would be known, but now Geoffrey Stokes had escaped upon the ship Great Yarmouth. Oh, if only he had seen him a minute earlier! If only something— could it have been that impious knave Geoffrey, he wondered, had not struck him so violently in the back, and hurled him to the boat, where he lay almost senseless till the vessel had glided from them down the river? Well, she was gone, and Geoffrey in her. He was but a common serving man, after all, who, if he knew anything, would never have the wit to use his knowledge, although it was true he had been wise enough to fly from England. No papers had been discovered upon Sir John's body, and no money. Without doubt, the old knight had found time to pass them on to Geoffrey, who now fled the kingdom disguised as a sailor. Oh, what ill chance had put him on board the same vessel with Sir Christopher Harfleet? Well, Sir Christopher would probably die. Were Brother Martin a little less of a fool, he would certainly die, but the fact remained that this monk, though able, in such matters was a fool, with a conscience that would not suit itself to circumstances. If Christopher could be saved, Martin would save him, as he had already saved him in the shed, even if he handed him over to the Inquisition afterwards. Still, he might slip through his fingers, or the vessel might be lost, as was devoutly to be prayed, and seemed not unlikely at this season of the year. Also, the first opportunity must be taken to send certain messages to Spain that might result in hampering the activities of Brother Martin and of Sir Christopher Harfleet, if he lived to reach that land. Meanwhile, reflected Malden, other things had gone wrong. He had wished to proclaim his wardship over Cicely, and to immure her in a nunnery because of her great possessions, which he needed for the cause, but he had not wished her death. Indeed, he was fond of the girl, whom he had known from a child, and her innocent blood was a weight that he ill could bear, he who at heart always shrank from the shedding of blood. Still, heaven had killed her, not he, and the matter could not now be mended. Also, as she was dead, her inheritance would, he thought, fall into his hands without further trouble, for he, a mitred abbot with a seat among the lords of the realm, had friends in London who, for a fee, could stifle inquiry into all this far-off business. No, no, he must not be faint-hearted, who, after all, had much for which to be thankful. Meanwhile, the cause went on, that great cause of the threatened church to which he had devoted his life. Henry the heretic would fall. The Spanish emperor, whose spy he was, and who loved him well, would invade and take England. He would yet live to see the Holy Inquisition at work at Westminster, and himself, yes, himself, had it not been hinted to him, enthroned at Canterbury, the cardinal's red hat he coveted upon his head, and, oh glorious thought, perhaps afterwards wearing the triple crown at Rome. Rain was falling heavily when the abbot, with his escort of 2 monks and half a dozen men-at-arms, rode up to Cranwell. The house was now but a smoking heap of ashes, mingled with charred beams and burnt clay, in the midst of which, scarcely visible through the clouds of steam caused by the falling rain, rose the grim old Norman tower, for on its stonework the flames had beat vainly. "Why have we come here?" asked one of the monks, surveying the dismal scene with a shudder. "To seek the bodies of the Lady Cicely and her woman, and give them Christian burial," answered the abbot. "After bringing them to a most unchristian death," muttered the monk to himself, then added aloud, "You were ever charitable, my lord abbot, and though she defied you, such as that noble ladies do. As for the nurse Emlyn, she was a witch, and did but come to the end that she deserved, if she be really dead." "What mean you?" asked the abbot sharply. "I mean that, being a witch, the fire may have turned from her." "Pray God, then, that it turned from her mistress also. But it cannot be. Only a fiend could have lived in the heat of that furnace. Look, even the tower is gutted." "No, it cannot be," answered the monk. "So, since we shall never find them, let us chant the burial office over this great grave of theirs, and be gone. The sooner the better, for yon place has a haunted look." "Not till we have searched out their bones, which must be beneath the tower yonder, whereon we saw them last," replied the abbot, adding in a low voice, "Remember, brother, the Lady Cicely had jewels of great price, which, if they were wrapped in leather, the fire may have spared, and these are among our heritage. At Shefton they cannot be found, therefore they must be here, and the seeking of them is no task for common folk. That is why I hurried hither so fast. Do you understand?" The monk nodded his head. Having dismounted, they gave their horses to the serving men, and began to make an examination of the ruin, the abbot leaning on his inferior's arm, for he was in great pain from the blow in the back that Geoffrey had administered with his sea-boot, and the bruises which he had received in falling to the boat. First they passed under the gatehouse, which still stood, only to find that the courtyard beyond was so choked with smouldering rubbish that they could make no entry, for it will be remembered that the house had fallen outwards. Here, however, lying by the carcass of a horse, they found the body of one of the men whom Christopher had killed in his last stand, and caused it to be borne out. Then, followed by their people, leaving the dead man in the gateway, they walked round the ruin, keeping on the inner side of the moat, till they came to the little pleasance garden at its back. "Look," said the monk in a frightened voice, pointing to some scorched bushes that had been a bower. The abbot did so, but for a while could see nothing because of the wreaths of steam. Presently a puff of wind blew these aside, and there, standing hand in hand, he beheld the figures of two women. His men beheld them also, and called aloud that these were the ghosts of Cicely and Emlyn. As they spoke, the figures, still hand in hand, began to walk towards them, and they saw that they were Cicely and Emlyn indeed, but in the flesh, quite unharmed. For a moment there was deep silence. Then the abbot asked, "Whence come you, Mistress Cicely?" "Out of the fire," she answered in a small, cold voice. "Out of the fire? How did you live through the fire?" "God sent his angel to save us," she answered, again in that small voice. "A miracle," muttered the monk, "a true miracle." "Or mayhap Emlyn Stower's witchcraft," exclaimed one of the men behind, and Malden started at his words. "Lead me to my husband, my lord abbot, lest thinking me dead, his heart should break," said Cicely. Now again there was silence so deep that they could hear the patter of every drop of falling rain. Twice the abbot strove to speak, but could not, but at the third effort his words came. "The man you call your husband, but who was not your husband, but your ravisher, was slain in the fray last night, Cicely Fothergill." She stood quite quiet for a while, as though considering his words, then said, in the same unnatural voice, "You lie, my lord abbot. You were ever a liar, like your father the devil, for the angel told me so in the midst of the fire. Also, he told me that, though I seemed to see him fall, Christopher is alive upon the earth. Yes, and other things, many other things." And she passed her hand before her eyes, and held it there, as though to shut out the sight of her enemy's face. Now the abbot trembled in his terror, he who knew that he lied, though at that time none else there knew it. It was as though suddenly he had been haled before the judgment seat, where all secrets must be bared. "Some evil spirit has entered into you," he said huskily. She dropped her hand, pointing at him. "Nay, nay, I never knew but one evil spirit, and he stands before me." "Cicely," he went on, "cease your blaspheming. Alas, that I must tell it you. Sir Christopher Harfley is dead and buried in yonder churchyard." "What? So soon, and all uncoffined? He who was a noble knight? Then you buried him living, and living, in a day to come he shall rise up against you. Hear my words all. Christopher Harfleet shall rise up living, and give testimony against this devil in a monk's robe, and afterwards, and she laughed shrilly, then suddenly fell down and lay still. Now Emlyn, the dark and handsome, as became her Spanish or perhaps gypsy blood, who all this while had stood silent, her arms folded upon her high bosom, leaned down and looked at her. Then she straightened herself, and her face was like the face of a beautiful fiend. "She is dead!" she screamed. "My dove is dead! She whom these breasts nursed, the greatest lady of all the wolds and all the vales, the Lady of Blossholme, of Cranwell, and of Shefton, in whose veins ran the blood of mighty nobles, aye, and of old kings, is dead, murdered by a beggarly foreign monk, who not 10 days gone butchered her father also yonder by King's grave, yonder by the mere. Oh, the arrow in his throat! The arrow in his throat! I cursed the hand that shot it, and today that hand is blue beneath the mould. So too I curse you, Maldonado, evil-gifted one, abbot consecrated by Satan, you and all your herd of butchers." And she broke into a stream of Spanish imprecations, whereof the abbot knew the meaning well. Presently Emlyn paused, and looked behind her at the smouldering ruins. "This house is burned," she cried. "Well, mark Emlyn's words, even so shall your house burn, while your monks run squeaking like rats from a flaming rick. You have stolen the lands, they shall be taken from you, and yours also, every acre of them. Not enough shall be left to bury you in, for priest you'll need no burial. The fowls of the air shall bury you, and that's the nearest you will ever get to heaven, in their filthy crops. Murderer, if Christopher Harfleet is dead, yet he shall live, as his lady swore, for his seed shall rise up against you. Oh, I forgot. How can it? How can it? Seeing that she is dead with him, and their bridal coverlet has become a pall woven by the black monks. Yet it shall. How, I know not, but it shall. Christopher Harfleet's seed shall sit where the abbots of Blossholme sat, and from father to son tell the tale of the last of them, the Spaniard who plotted against England's king and overshot himself." Her rage veered like a hurricane wind. Forgetting the abbot, she turned upon the monk at his side and cursed him. Then she cursed the hired men at arms, those present and those absent, many by name, and lastly, greatest crime of all, she cursed the Pope and the King of Spain, and called to God in heaven and Henry of England upon earth to avenge her Lady Cicely's wrongs, and the murder of Sir John Fotherell, and the murder of Christopher Harfleet, on each and all of them, individually and separately. So fierce and fearful was her onslaught, that all who heard her were reduced to utter silence. The abbot and the monk leaned against each other, the soldiers crossed themselves and muttered prayers, while one of them, running up, fell upon his knees and assured her that he had had nothing to do with all this business, having only returned from a journey last night, and been called thither that morning. Emlyn, who had paused from lack of breath, listened to him, and said, "Then I take the curse off you and yours, John Athy. Now lift up my lady and bear her to the church, for there we will lay her out as becomes her rank, though not with her jewels, her great and priceless jewels, for which she was hunted like a doe. She must lie without her jewels, her pearls and coronet and rings, her stomacher and necklets of bright gems, that were worth so much more than those beggarly acres, those that once a sultan's woman wore. They are lost, though perhaps yonder abbot has found them. Sir John Fotherell bore them to London for safekeeping, and good Sir John is dead. Footpads set on him in the forest, and an arrow shot from behind pierced his throat. Those who killed him have the jewels, and the dead bride must lie without them, adorned in the naked beauty that God gave to her. Lift her, John Athy, and you monks, set up your funeral chant, buill to the church. The bride who knelt before the altar shall lie there before the altar, Clement Maldonado's last offering to God. First the father, then the husband, and now the wife, the sweet new-made wife." So she raved on, while they stood before her dumbfounded, and the man lifted up Cicely. Then suddenly this same Cicely, whom all thought dead, opened her eyes, and struggled from his arms to her feet. "See," screamed Emlyn, "did I not tell you that Harfleet's seed should live to be avenged upon all your tribe, and she stands there who will bear it? Now where shall we shelter till England hears this tale? Cranwell is down, though it shall rise again, and Shefton is stolen. Where shall we shelter?" "Thrust away that woman," said the abbot in a hoarse voice, "for her witchcrafts poison the air. Set the Lady Cicely on a horse, and bear her to our nunnery of Blossholme, where she shall be tended." The men advanced to do his bidding, though very doubtfully. But Emlyn, hearing his words, ran to the abbot, and whispered something in his ear in a foreign tongue, that caused him to cross himself and stagger back from her. "I have changed my mind," he said to the servants. "Mistress Emlyn reminds me that between her and her lady there is the tie of foster motherhood. They may not be separated as yet. Take them both to the nunnery, where they shall dwell, and as for this woman's words, forget them, for she was mad with fear and grief, and knew not what she said. May God and his saints forgive her, as I do." End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 7. The Abbot's Offer. The nunnery at Blossholme was a peaceful place, a long, grey-gabled house set under shelter of a hill and surrounded by a high wall. Within this wall lay also the great garden, neglected enough, and the chapel, a building that still was beautiful in its decay. Once, indeed, Blossholme Priory, which was older than the abbey, had been rich and famous. Its foundress in the time of the first Edward, a certain Lady Matilda, one of the Plantagenets, who retired from the world after her husband had been killed in the Crusade, being childless, endowed it with all her lands. Other noble ladies who accompanied her there, or sought its refuge in after days, had done likewise, so that it grew in power and in wealth, till at its most prosperous time over 20 nuns told their beads within its walls. Then the proud abbey rose upon the opposing hill, and obtained some royal charter that the Pope confirmed, under which the Priory of Blossholme was affiliated to the Abbey of Blossholme, and the Abbot of Blossholme became the spiritual lord of its religious. From that day forward its fortunes began to decline, since under this pretext and that the abbots filched away its lands to swell their own estates. So it came about that at the date of our history the total revenue of this nunnery was but £130 a year of the money of the day, and even of this sum the abbot took tithe and toll. Now in all the great house that once had been so full, there dwelt but 6 nuns, one of whom was, in fact, a servant, while an aged monk from the abbey celebrated Mass in the fair chapel where lay the bones of so many who had gone before. Also on certain feasts the abbot himself attended, confessed the nuns, and granted them absolution and his holy blessing. On these days, too, he would examine their accounts, and if there were money in hand, take a share of it to serve his necessities, for which reason the prioress looked forward to his coming with little joy. It was to this ancient home of peace that the distraught Cicely and her servant Emlyn were conveyed upon the morrow of the great burning. Indeed, Cicely knew it well enough already, since as a child, during 3 years or more, she had gone there daily to be taught by the prioress Matilda, for every head of the priory took this name in turn to the honor of their foundress, and in accordance with the provisions of her will. Happy years they were, as these old nuns loved her in her youth and innocence, and she, too, loved them, every one. Now, by the workings of fate, she was borne back to the same quiet room where she had played and studied, a new-made wife, a new-made widow. But of all this poor Cicely knew nothing till 3 weeks or more had gone by, when at length her wandering brain cleared, and she opened her eyes to the world again. At the moment she was alone, and lay looking about her. The place was familiar. She recognized the deep windows, the faded tapestries of Abraham cutting Isaac's throat with the butcher's knife, and Jonah being shot into the very gateway of a castle where his family awaited him, from the mouth of a gigantic carp with goggle eyes, for the simple artist had found his whale's model in a stewpot. Well she remembered those delightful pictures, and how often she had wondered whether Isaac could escape bleeding to death, or Jonah's wife, with the outspread arms, withstand the sudden shock of her husband's unexpected arrival out of the interior of the whale. There also was the splendid fireplace of wrought stone, and above it, cunningly carved in gilded oak, gleamed many coats of arms without crests, for they were those of sundry noble prioresses. Yes, this was certainly the great guest chamber of Blossholme Priory, which, since the nuns had now few guests and many places in which to put them, had been given up to her, Sir John Fotterell's heiress, as her schoolroom. There she lay, thinking that she was a child again, a happy, careless child, or that she dreamed, till presently the door opened and Mother Matilda appeared, followed by Emlyn, who bore a tray, on which stood a silver bowl that smoked. There was no mistaking Mother Matilda in her black Benedictine robe and her white wimple, wearing the great silver crucifix, which was her badge of office, and the golden ring with an emerald bezel, whereon was cut St. Catherine being broken on the wheel, the ancient ring which every prioress of Blossholme had worn from the beginning. Moreover, who that had ever seen it could forget her sweet, old, high-bred face, with the fine lips, the arched nose, and the quick, kind, grey eyes? Cicely strove to rise, and to do her reverence, as had been her custom during those childish years, only to find that she could not, for lo! She fell back heavily upon her pillow. Thereon Emlyn, setting down the tray with a clatter upon a table, ran to her, and putting her arms about her, began to scold, as was her fashion, but in a very gentle voice, and Mother Matilda, kneeling by her bed, gave thanks to Jesus and his blessed saints, though why she thanked him at first Cicely did not understand. "Am I ill, Reverend Mother?" she asked. "Not now, daughter, but you were very ill," answered the prioress in her sweet, low voice. "Now we think that God has healed you." "How long have I been here?" she asked. The mother began to reckon, counting her beads, one for every day, for in such places time slips by. But long before she had finished, Emlyn replied quickly, "Cromwell Towers was burned 3 weeks yesternight." Then Cicely remembered, and with a bitter groan turned her face to the wall, while the mother reproached Emlyn, saying she had killed her. "I think not," answered the nurse in a low voice. "I think she has that which will not let her die," a saying that puzzled the prioress at this time. Emlyn was right. Cicely did not die. On the contrary, she grew strong and well in her body, though it was long before her mind recovered. Indeed, she glided about the place like a ghost in her black mourning robe, for now she no longer doubted that Christopher was dead, and she, the wife of a weak, widowed as well as orphaned. Then in her utter desolation came comfort. A light broke on the darkness of her soul like the moon above a tortured midnight sea. She was no longer quite alone. The murdered Christopher had left his image with her. If she lived, a child would be born to him, and therefore she would surely live. One evening, on her knees, she whispered her secret to the prioress Matilda, whereat the old nun blushed like a girl, yet after a moment's silent prayer, laid a thin hand upon her head in blessing. "The Lord Abbot declares that your marriage was no true marriage, my daughter, though why I do not understand, since the man was he whom your heart chose, and you were wed to him by an ordained priest before God's altar, and in the presence of the congregation." "I care not what he says," answered Cicely in a stubborn voice. "If I am not a true wife, then no woman ever was." "Dear daughter," answered Mother Matilda, "it is not for us unlearned women to question the wisdom of a holy abbot, who doubtless is inspired from on high." "If he is inspired, it is not from on high, mother. Would God or his saints teach him to murder my father and my husband, to seize my heritage, or to hold my person in this gentle prison? Such inspirations do not come from above, mother." "Hush, hush," said the prioress, glancing round her nervously. "Your woes have crazed you. Besides, you have no proof. In this world there are so many things that we cannot understand. Being an abbot, how could he do wrong, although to us his acts seem wrong? But let us not talk of these matters, of which, indeed, I only know from that rough-tongued Emlyn of yours, who, I am told, was not afraid to curse him terribly. I was about to say that whatever may be the law of it, I hold your marriage good and true, and its issue, should such come to you, pure and holy, and night by night I will pray that it shall be crowned with heaven's richest blessings." "I thank you, dear mother," answered Cicely, as she rose and left her. When she had gone, the prioress rose also, and, with a troubled face, began to walk up and down the refectory, for it was here that they had spoken together. Truly she could not understand, for unless all these tales were false, and how could they be false, this abbot, whom her high-bred English nature had always mistrusted, this dark, able Spanish monk, was no saint, but a wicked villain. Yet how could a consecrated abbot be a villain? There must be some explanation. It was only that she did not understand. Soon the news spread throughout the nunnery, and if the sisters had loved Cicely before, now they loved her twice as well. Of the doubts as to the validity of her marriage, like their prioress, they took no heed, for had it not been celebrated in a church? But that a child was to be born among them, ah, that was a joyful thing, a thing that had not happened for quite 200 years, when, alas, so said tradition and their records, there had been a dreadful scandal, which to this day was spoken of with bated breath. For be it known at once, this nunnery, whatever may or may not have been the case with some others, was one of which no evil could be said. Beneath their black robes, however, these old nuns were still as much women as the mothers who bore them, and this news of a child stirred them to the marrow. Among themselves in their hours of recreation they talked of little else, and even their prayers were largely occupied with this same matter. Indeed, poor, weak-witted old Sister Bridget, who hitherto had been secretly looked down upon because she was the only one of the 7 who was not of gentle birth, now became very popular. For Sister Bridget in her youth had been married, and borne 2 children, both of whom had been carried off by the smallpox after she was widowed, whereon, as her face was seamed by this same disease, so that she had no hope of another husband, as her neighbours said, or because her heart was broken, as she said, she entered into religion. Now she constituted herself Cicely's chief attendant, and although that lady was quite well and strong, persecuted her with advice and with noxious mixtures which she brewed, till Emlyn, descending on her like a storm, hunted her from the room and cast her medicines through the window. That these sisters should be thus interested in so small a matter was not, indeed, wonderful, seeing that if their lives had been secluded before, since the Lady Cicely came amongst them, they were 10 times more so. Soon they discovered that she and her servant, Emlyn Stower, were, in fact, prisoners, which meant that they, her hostesses, were prisoners also. None were allowed to enter the nunnery, save the silent old monk who confessed them and celebrated the Mass, nor, by an order of the abbot, were they suffered to go abroad upon any business whatsoever. For the rest, as their only means of communication with those who dwelt beyond their walls was the surly gardener, who was deaf, and set there to spy on them, little news ever reached them. They were almost dead to the world, which, had they known it, was busy enough just then with matters that concerned them in all other religious houses. At length one day, when Cicely and Emmeline were seated in the garden beneath the flowering hawthorn tree, for now June had come, and with it warm weather. Of a sudden Sister Bridget hurried up, saying that the Abbot of Blossholme desired their presence. At this tidings Cicely turned faint, and Emmeline rated Bridget, asking if her few wits had left her, or if she thought that name was so pleasant to her mistress that she should suddenly bawl it in her ear. Thereon the poor old soul, who was not too strong-brained, and much afraid of Emmeline, since she had thrown her medicines out of the window, began to weep, protesting that she had meant no harm, till Cicely, recovering, soothed her, and sent her back to say that she would wait upon his lordship. "Are you afraid of him, mistress?" asked Emmeline, as they prepared to follow. "A little, nurse. He has shown himself a man to be afraid of, has he not? My father and my husband are in his net, and will he spare the last fish in the pool? A very narrow pool." And she glanced at the high walls about her. "I fear lest he should take you from me, and wonder why he has not done so already." "Because my father was a Spaniard, and through him I know that which would ruin him with his friends, the Pope and the Emperor. Also, he believes that I have the evil eye, and dreads my curse. Still, one day he may try to murder me, who knows? Only then the secrets of the jewels will go with me, for that is mine alone, not yours even, for if you had it they would squeeze it out of you. Meanwhile, he will try to profess you a nun, but push him off with soft words. Say that you will think of it after your child is born. Till then he can do nothing, and, if Mother Matilda's fresh tidings are true, by that time, perchance, there will be no more nuns in England." Now very quietly, and by the side door, they were entering the old reception hall, that was only used for the entertainment of visitors and on other great occasions, and close to them saw the abbot seated in his chair, while the prioress stood before him, rendering her accounts. "Whether you can spare it or no," they heard him say sharply, "I must have the half-year's rent. The times are evil. We servants of the Lord are threatened by that adulterous king and his proud ministers, who swear they will strip us to the shirt and turn us out to starve. I'm but just from London, and although our enemy Anne Boleyn has lost her wanton head, I tell you the danger is great. Money must be had to stir up rebellion, for who can arm without it, and but little comes from Spain. I am in treaty to sell the fodderel lands for what they will fetch, but as yet can give no title. Either that stiff-necked girl must sign a release, or she must profess, for otherwise, while she lives, some lawyer or relative might upset the sale. Is she yet prepared to take her first vows? If not, I shall hold you much to blame." "Nay," answered the prioress, "there are reasons. You have been away, and have not heard—" She hesitated, and looked about her nervously, to see Cicely and Emmeline standing behind them. "What do you there, daughter?" she asked, with as much asperity as she ever showed. "In truth I know not, mother," answered Cicely. "Sister Bridget told us that the Lord Abbot desired our presence." "I bid her say that you were to wait him in my chamber," said the prioress in a vexed voice. "Well," broke in the abbot, "it would seem that you have a fool for a messenger. If it is that pock-marked hag, her brain has been gone for years. Lord Cicely, I greet you, though after the sorrows that have fallen on you, whereof by your leave we will not speak, since there is no use in stirring up such memories, I grieve to see you in that worldly garb, who thought you would have changed it for a better. But ere you entered, the Holy Mother here spoke of some obstacle that stood between you and God. What is it? Perchance my counsel may be of service. Not this woman, as I trust." And he frowned at Emmeline, who at once answered in her steady voice, "Nay, my lord abbot, I stand not between her and God and his holiness, but between her and man and his iniquity. Still I can tell you of that obstacle, which comes from God, if you so need." Now the old prioress, blushing to her white hair, bent forward, and whispered in the abbot's ear words at which he sprang up, as though a wasp had stung him. "Pest on it, it cannot be," he said. "Well, well, there it is, and must be swallowed with the rest. Pity, though," he added, with a sneer on his dark face, "since many a year has gone by since these walls have seen a bastard, and as things are, that may pull them down about your ears." "I know such brats are dangerous," interrupted Emmeline, looking Malden full in the eyes. "My father told me of a young monk in Spain, I forget his name, who brought certain ladies to the torture in some such matter. But who talks of bastards in the case of Dame Cicely Harfleet, widow of Sir Christopher Harfleet, slain by the Abbot of Blossholme? Silence, woman. Where there is no lawful marriage, there can be no lawful child. To take the lawful inheritance that it lawfully inherits. Say, my lord abbot, did Sir Christopher make you his heir also?" Then, before he could answer, Cicely, who had been silent all this while, broke in. "Heap what insult you will on me, my lord abbot, and having robbed me of my father, my husband, and my heart, rob me of my goods also if you can. In my case it matters little, but slander not my child, if one should be born to me, nor dare to touch its rights. Think not that you can break the mother as you broke the girl, for there you will find that you have a she-wolf by the ear." He looked at her, they all looked at her, for in her eyes was something that compelled theirs. Clement Malden, who knew the world, and how a she-wolf can fight for its cub, read in them a warning which caused him to change his tone. "Tut, tut, daughter," he said, "what is the good of vaporing of a child that is not, and may never be? When it comes, I will christen it, and we will talk." "When it comes, you will not lay a finger on it. I'd rather that it went unbaptized to its grave than marked with your cross of blood." He waved his hand. "There is another matter, or rather two, of which I must speak to you, my daughter. When do you take your first vows?" "We will talk of it after my child is born. 'Tis a child of sin, you say, and I am unrepentant, a wicked woman, not fit to take a holy vow, to which, moreover, you cannot force me," she replied, with bitter sarcasm. Again he waved his hand, for the she-wolf showed her teeth. "The second matter is," he went on, "that I need your signature to a writing. It is nothing but a form, and one I fear you cannot read, nor in faith can I." And with a somewhat doubtful smile, he drew out a crabbed indenture and spread it before her on the table. "What?" she laughed, brushing aside the parchment. "Have you remembered that yesterday I came of age, and am, therefore, no more your ward, if such I ever was? You should have sold my inheritance more swiftly, for now the title you can give is rotten as last year's apples, and I'll sign nothing. Bear witness, Mother Matilda, and you, Emlyn Stower, that I have signed and will sign nothing. Clement Malden, Abbot of Blossholme, I am a free woman of full age, even though, as you say, I be a wanton. Where is your right to chain up a wanton who is no religious? Unlock these gates and let me go." Now he felt the wolf's fangs, and they were sharp. "Whither would you go?" he asked. "Whither but to the king, to lay my cause before him, as my father would have done last Christmas time." It was a bold speech, but foolish. The she-wolf had loosed her hold to growl at a hunter with a bloody sword. "I think your father never reached his grace with his sack of falsehoods, nor might you, Cicely Fotherell. The times are rough, rebellion is in the air, and many wild men hunt the woods and roads. No, no, for your own sake, you bide here in safety till you murder me. Oh, it is in your mind. Do you remember the angel who spoke with me in the fire, and told me my husband was not dead? A lying spirit, then, no angel." "I am not sure." And again she passed her hand across her eyes, as she had done in that dreadful dawn at Cranwell. "Well, I prayed to God to help me, and last night that angel came again, and spoke in my sleep. He told me to fear you not at all, my lord abbot, however sore my case, and however near my death it might seem, to fear you not at all, neither I nor my child, since God had shaped a stone to drop upon your head. He showed it me. It was like an axe." Now the old prioress held up her hands and gasped in horror, but the abbot leapt from his seat in rage, or was it fear? "Wanton you name yourself," he exclaimed, "but I name you witch also, who, if you had your deserts, should die the death of a witch by fire. Mother Matilda, I command you, on your oath, keep this witch fast, and make report to me of all her sorceries. It is not fitting that such a one should walk abroad to bring evil on the innocent. Witch and wanton, be gone to your chamber." Cicely listened, then, without another word, broke into a little scornful laugh, and, turning, left the room, followed by the prioress. But Emlyn did not go. She stayed behind, a smile on her dark, handsome face. "You've lost the throw, though all your dice were loaded," she said boldly. The abbot turned on her and reviled her. "Woman," he said, "if she is a witch, you're the familiar, and certainly you shall burn even though she escape. It is you who taught her how to call up the devil." "Then you had best keep me living, my lord abbot, that I may teach her how to lay him. Nay, threaten not. Why, the rack might make me speak, and the birds of the air carry the matter." His face paled. Then suddenly he asked, "Where are those jewels? I need them. Give me the jewels, and you shall go free, and perchance your accursed mistress with you." "I told you," she answered. "Sir John took them to London, and if they were not found upon his body, then either he threw them away, or Geoffrey Stokes carried them to wherever he has gone. Drag the mere, search the forest, find Geoffrey, and ask him." "You lie, woman. When you and your mistress fled from Shefton, a servant there saw you with the box that held those jewels in your hand." "True, my lord abbot, but it no longer held them. only my mistress' love letters, which she would not leave behind." "Then where is the box, and where are those letters?" "We grew short of fuel in the siege, and burned both. When a woman has her man, she doesn't want his letters. Surely, Maldonado," she added with meaning, "you should know that it is not always wise to keep old letters. What, I wonder, would you give for some that I have seen and that are not burned?" "Accursed spawn of Satan," hissed the abbot, "how dare you flaunt me thus? When Cicely was wed to Christopher, she wore those very gems. I have it from those who saw her decked in them, the necklace on her bosom, the priceless rosebud pearls hanging from her ears." "Oh ho," said Emlyn, "so you own that she was wed, the pure soul whom but now you called a wanton. Look you, Sir Abbot, we will fence no more. She wore the jewels. Geoffrey took nothing hence save your death warrant." "Then where are they?" he asked, striking his fist upon the table. "Where? Why, where you'll never follow them, gone up to heaven in the fire. Thinking we might be robbed, I hid them behind a secret panel in her chamber, purposing to return for them later. Go, rake out the ashes. You might find a cracked diamond or two, but not the pearls. They fly in fire. There, that's the truth at last, and much good may it do to you." The abbot groaned. Like most Spaniards, he was emotional, and could not help it. His bitterness burst from his heart. Emlyn laughed at him. "See how the wise and mighty of this world overshoot themselves," she said. "Clement Maldonado, I have known you for some 20 years, and when I was called the Beauty of Blossholme, and the abbot who went before you made me the church's ward, though I ever hated you who hunted down my father, you had softer words for me than those you name me by today. Well, I have watched you rise, and I shall watch you fall, and I know your heart and its desires. Money is what you lust for and must have, for otherwise how will you gain your end? It was the jewels that you needed, not the Shefton lands, which are worth little nowadays, and will soon be worth less. Why, one of those pink pearls placed among the Jews would buy 3 parishes, with their hulls thrown in. For the sake of those jewels you have brought death on some, and misery on some, and on your own soul damnation without end, though had you but been wise and consulted me, why, they, or some of them, might have been yours. Sir John was no fool. He would have parted with a pearl or two, of which he did not know the value, to end a feud against the church and safeguard his title and his daughter. And now, in your madness, you've burnt them, burnt a king's ransom, or what might have pulled down a king. Oh, had you but guessed it, you'd have hacked off the hand that put a torch to Cranwell Towers, for now the gold you need is lacking to you, and therefore all your grand schemes will fail, and you'll be buried in their ruin, as you thought we were in Cranwell." The abbot, who had listened to this long and bitter speech in patience, groaned again. "You are a clever woman," he said. "We understand each other, coming from the same blood. You know the case. What is your counsel to me now?" "That which you will not take, being foredoomed for your sins. Still I'll give it honestly. Set the Lady Cicely free, restore her lands, confess your evil doings. Fly the kingdom before Cromwell turns on you, and Henry finds you out, taking with you all the gold that you can gather, and bribe the Emperor Charles to give you a bishopric in Granada, or elsewhere, not near Seville, for reasons that you know. So shall you live honored, and one day, after you have been dead a long while, and many things are forgotten, perchance be beatified as St. Clement of Blossholme." The abbot looked at her reflectively. "If I sought safety only and old age comforts, your counsel might be good, but I play for higher stakes." "You set your head against them," broke in Emlyn. "Not so, woman, for in any case that head must win. If it stays upon my shoulders, it will wear an archbishop's mitre, or a cardinal's hat, or perhaps something nobler yet, and if it parts from them, why, then a heavenly crown of glory." "Your head! Your head!" exclaimed Emlyn, with a contemptuous laugh. "Why not?" he answered gravely. "You chance to know of some errors of my youth, but they are long ago repented of, and for such there is plentiful forgiveness." And he crossed himself. "Were it not so, who would escape?" Emlyn, who had been standing all this while, sat herself down, set her elbows on the table, and rested her chin upon her clenched hands. "True," she said, looking him in the eyes, "none of us would escape. But, Clement Malden, how about the unrepented errors of your age? Sir John Fothergill, for instance, Sir Christopher Harfleet, for instance, my Lady Cicely, for instance, to say nothing of black treason, and a few other matters. Even were all these charges true, which I deny, they are no sins, seeing that they would have been done, every one of them, not for my own sake, but for that of the Church, to overset her enemies, to rebuild her tottering walls, to secure her eternally in this realm, and to lift you, Clement Malden, to the topmost pinnacle of her temple, whence Satan shows you all the kingdoms of the world, swearing that they shall be yours." Apparently the abbot did not resent this bold speech. Indeed, Emmeline's apt illustration seemed to please him. Only he corrected her gently, saying, "Not Satan, but Satan's lord." Then he paused a while, looked round the chamber to see that the doors were shut, and make sure that they were alone, and went on. "Emmeline Stower, you have great wits and courage, more than any woman that I know. Also you have knowledge both of the world and of what lies beyond it, being what superstitious fools call a witch, but I a prophetess or a seer. These things come to you with your blood, I suppose, seeing that your mother was of a gypsy tribe, and your father a hybrid Spanish gentleman, very learned and clever, though a pestilent heretic, for which cause he fled for his life from Spain, to find his dark death in England. The Holy Inquisition is patient and has a long arm, if I remember right. Also, it was this business of the heresy of my father that first brought you to Blossholme, where after his vanishing and the public burning of that book of his, you so greatly prospered. You are always right, Emmeline, and therefore I need not tell you further that we have been old enemies in Spain, which is why I was chosen to hunt him down, and how you come to know certain things." She nodded, and he went on. "So much for the heretic father. Now for the gypsy mother. She died, by her own hand it is said, to escape the punishment of the law." "No need to beat about the bush, Abbot. Let's have truth between old friends. You mean to escape being burned by you as a witch, because she had the letters which were not burned, and threatened to use them, as I do." "Why do you break up such tales, Emmeline?" he interposed blandly. "At least she died, but not until she had taught you all she knew. The rest of the history is short. You fell in love with old Yeoman Bull's son, or said you did, that same great silly Thomas, who is now a lay brother at the Abbey." "Or said I did," she repeated. "At least he fell in love with me, and perhaps I wished an honest man to protect me, who in those days was young and fair. Moreover, he was not silly then. That came upon him after he fell into your hands. Oh, have done with it," she went on, in a voice of suppressed passion. "The witch's fair daughter was the church's ward, and you ruled the abbot of that time, and he forced me into marriage with old Peter Stower as his third wife. I cursed him, and he died, as I warned him that he would, and I bore a child, and it died. Then with what was left to me I took refuge with Sir John Fotterell, who ever was my friend, and became foster mother to his daughter, the only creature, save one, that I have loved in this wide wicked world. That's all the story. And now what more do you want of me, Clement Maldonado, evil-gifted one?" "Emmeline, I want what I always wanted, and you always refused. Your help, your partnership. I mean the partnership of that brain of yours, the help of the knowledge that you have, no more. At Cranwell Towers you called down evil on me. Take off that ban, for I'll speak truth, it weighs heavy on my mind. Let us bury all the past, let us clasp hands and be friends. You have the true vision. Do you remember that when you thought Cicely dead, you said that her seed should rise up against me, and now it seems that it will be so." "What would you give me?" asked Emmeline curiously. "I will give you wealth. I will give you what you love more, power, and rank too, if you wish it. The whole church shall listen to you. What you desire shall be done in this realm, yes, and across the world. I speak no lie. I pledge my soul on it, and the honor of those I serve, which I have authority to do. In return, all I ask of you is your wisdom, that you should read the future for me, that you should show me which way to walk." "Nothing more?" "Yes, 2 things. That you should find me those burned jewels, and with them the old letters that were not burned, and that this child of the Lady Cicely shall not chance to live to take what you promised to it. Her life I give you, for a nun more or less can matter little." "A noble offer, and in this case I am sure you will pay what you promise, should you live. But what if I refuse?" "Then," answered the abbot, dropping his fist upon the table, "then death for both of you, the witch's death, for I dare not let you go to work my ruin. Remember, I am master here, you are my prisoners. Few know that you live in this place, except a handful of weak-brained women who will fear to speak, puppets that must dance when I pull the string. And I'll see that no soul shall come near these walls. Choose, then, between death and all its terrors, or life and all its hopes." On the table there stood a wooden bowl filled with roses. Emmeline drew it to her, and taking the roses into her hands, threw them to the floor. Then she waited for the water to steady, saying, "The riddle is hard. Perhaps, if in truth I have such power, I shall find its answer here." Presently, as he gazed at her, fascinated, she breathed upon the water and stared into it for a long while. At length she looked up and said, "Death or life, that was the choice you gave me. Well, Clement Maldonado, on behalf of myself and the Lady Cicely, and her husband Sir Christopher, and the child that shall be born, and of God who directs all these things, I choose death." There was a solemn silence. Then the abbot rose, and said, "Good, on your own head be it." Again there was a silence, and, as she made no answer, he turned and walked towards the door, leaving her still staring into the bowl. "Good," she repeated, as he laid his hand upon the latch. "I have told you that I choose death, but I have not told you whose death it is I choose. Play your game, my lord abbot, and I'll play mine, remembering that God holds the stakes. Meanwhile, I confirm the words I spoke in my rage at Cranwell. Expect evil, for I see now that it shall fall on you, in all with which you have to do." Then with a sudden movement she upset the bowl upon the table, and watched him go. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 8. Emlyn Calls Her Man. One by one the weeks passed over the heads of Cicely and Emlyn in their prison, and brought them neither hope nor tidings. Indeed, although they could not see its cords, they felt that the evil net which held them was drawing ever tighter. There were fear and pity, as well as love, in the eyes of Mother Matilda when she looked at Cicely, which she did only if she thought that no one observed her. The nuns also were afraid, though it was clear that they knew not of what. One evening Emlyn, finding the prioress alone, sprang questions on her, asking what was in the wind, and why her lady, a free woman of full age, was detained there against her will. The old nun's face grew secret. She answered that she did not know of anything unusual, and that, as regarded the detention, she must obey the commands of her spiritual superior. "Then," burst out Emlyn, "I tell you that you do so at your peril. I tell you that whether my lady lives or dies, there are those who will call you to a strict account, aye, and those who will listen to the prayer of the helpless. Mother Matilda, England is not the land it was when as a girl they buried you in these mouldy walls. Where does God say that you have the right to hold free women like felons in a jail? Tell me." "I cannot," moaned Mother Matilda, wringing her thin hands. "The right is very hard to find. This place is strictly guarded, and whatever I may think, I must do what I am bid, lest my soul should suffer." "Your soul! You cloistered women think always of your miserable souls, but of those of other folk, aye, and of their bodies too, nothing. Then you'll not help me?" I cannot, who am myself in bonds," she replied again. "So be it, mother, then I'll help myself, and when I do, God help you all." And with a contemptuous shrug of her broad shoulders, she walked away, leaving the poor old prioress almost in tears. Emlyn's threats were bold as her own heart, but how could she execute even a tenth of them? The right was on their side, indeed, but, as many a captive has found in those days and other days, right is no Joshua's trumpet to cause high walls to fall. Moreover, Cicely would not aid her. Now that her husband was dead, she took interest in one thing only, his child who was to be. For the rest she seemed to care nothing. Since she had no friends with whom she could communicate, and her wealth, as she understood, had been taken from her, what better place, she asked, could there be for that child to see the light than in this quiet nunnery? When it was born, and she was well again, she would consider other matters. Meanwhile she was languid, and why was Emlyn always prating to her of freedom? If she were free, what should she do, and whither should she go? The nuns were very kind to her. They loved her as she did them. So she talked on, and Emlyn, listening, did not dare to tell her the truth, that here she feared for the life of her child, dreading lest that news might bring about the death of both of them. So she let her be, and fell back on her own wits. First she thought of escape, only to abandon the idea, for her mistress was in no state to face its perils. Moreover, whither should they go? Then rescue came into her mind, but, alas, who would rescue them? The great men in London, perhaps, as a matter of policy, but great men are hard to come at, even for the free. If she were free, she might find means to make them listen, but she was not, nor could she leave her lady at such a time. What remained then? So to contrive that they should be set free. Perhaps it might be done at a price, that of Cicely's jewels, of which she alone knew the hiding place, and with them a deed of indemnity against her prosecutors. Emmeline was not minded to give either. Moreover, she guessed that it might be in vain. Once outside those walls, they knew too much to be allowed to live. And yet within those walls, Cicely's child would not be allowed to live, the child that was heir to all. What, then, could loose them and make them safe? Terror, perhaps. Such terror as that through which the Israelites escaped from bondage. Oh, if she could but find a Moses to call down the plagues of Egypt upon this pharaoh of an abbot, those plagues with which she had threatened him. But although she believed that they would fall, why did she believe it, she wondered? She was as yet impotent to fulfill. Now Thomas Bull! If only she could have words with that faithful Thomas Bull, the fierce and cunning man whom they thought foolish. This idea of Thomas Bull took possession of Emmeline's mind. Thomas Bull, who had loved her all his life, who would die to serve her. She strove in vain to get in touch with him. The old gardener was so deaf that he could not, or would not, understand. The silly Bridget gave the letter that she wrote to him to the prioress by mistake, who burnt it before her eyes and said nothing. The monks who brought provisions to the nunnery were always received by 3 of the sisters, set to spy on each other and on them, so that she could not come near to them alone. The priest who celebrated Mass was an old enemy of hers. With him she could do nothing, and no one else was allowed to approach the place except once or twice the abbot, who was closeted for hours with the prioress, but spoke to her no more. Why, wondered Emmeline, should less than half a mile of space be such a barrier between her and Thomas Bull? If he stood within 20 yards of her, she could make him understand. Why not, then, when he stood within 500? This idea possessed her. These limitations of nature made her mad. She refused to accept them. Night by night, lying brooding in her bed, while Cicely slept in peace at her side, she threw out her strong soul towards the soul of her old lover, Thomas Bull, commanding him to listen, to obey, to come. At first, nothing happened. Afterwards, she had a vague sense of being answered. Although she could not see or hear him, she felt his presence. Then one afternoon, looking from an upper dormer window, she saw a scuffle going on outside the gateway, and heard angry voices. Thomas Bull was trying to force his way in at the door, whence he was repelled by the abbot's men, who always watched there. In the evening she gathered the truth from the nuns, who did not know that she was listening to what they said. It seemed that Thomas, whom they spoke of as a madman or as drunk, had tried to break into the nunnery. When he was asked what he wanted, he answered that he did not know, but he must speak with Emmeline Stower. At this tidings she smiled to herself, for now she knew that he had heard her, and that in this way or in that he would obey her summons and come. 2 days later Thomas came, thus. The September evening was fading into night, and Emmeline, leaving Cicely resting on her bed, which now she often did for a while before the supper hour, had gone into the garden to enjoy the pleasant air. There she walked until she wearied of its sameness, then entered the old chapel by a side door, and sat herself down to think in the chancel, not far from a life-sized statue of the Virgin, in painted oak, which stood here against the wall. This statue she had often noticed, because of its peculiarities, for the back half of it seemed to be built into the masonry. Also, the eye sockets were empty, which suggested to the observant Emmeline either that they had once held jewels, or that this was no likeness of the Holy Mother, but rather one of the blind St. Lucy. While Emmeline mused there quite alone, for at this hour none entered the place, nor would until the next morning, she thought that she heard strange noises, as of someone stirring, which came from the neighbourhood of the statue. Now many would have been scared and departed, but not so Emmeline, who only sat still and listened. Presently, without moving her head, she looked also. As it happened, the light of the setting sun, pouring through the west window, fell almost full upon the figure, and by it she saw, or thought she saw, that the eye sockets were no longer empty. There were eyes in them, which moved and flashed. Now for a moment even Emmeline was frightened. Then she reasoned with herself, reflecting that a priest or one of the nuns was watching her from behind the statue, which they might do for as long as they pleased. Or perhaps this was a miracle, such as she had heard so much of but never seen. Well, why should she fear spies or miracles? She would sit where she was and see what happened. Nor had she long to wait, for presently a voice, a hoarse, manly voice, whispered, Emlyn! Emlyn Stower!" "Yes," she answered, also in a whisper. "Who speaks?" "Who do you think?" asked the voice, with a chuckle. "A devil, perhaps." "Well, if it be a friendly devil, I don't know that I mind, who need company in this lone place, so appear man or devil," answered Emlyn stoutly. But in secret she crossed herself beneath her cape, for in those days folk believed in the appearance of devils for no good purposes. The statue began to creak, then opened like a door, though very unwillingly, as though its hinges had been fixed for a long, long time, and rusted in the damp, which was indeed the case. Inside of it, like a corpse in an upright coffin, appeared a figure, a square, strong figure, clad in a tattered monk's robe, surmounted by a large head with fiery red hair and beetling brows, beneath which shone two wild grey eyes. Emlyn, whose heart had stood still, for, after all, Satan is awkward company for a mortal woman, waited till it gave a jump in her breast, and went on again as usual. Then she said quietly, "What are you doing there, Thomas Bull?" "That is what I want to know, Emlyn. Night and day for weeks you have been calling me, and so I came." "Yes, I have been calling you, but how did you come?" "By the old monk's road. They had forgotten it long ago, and my grandfather told me of it when I was a boy, and at last a fox showed me where it ran. It's a dark road, and when first I tried it I thought I should be poisoned, but now the air is none so bad. It ran to the Abbey once, and may still, but my door and Mrs. Fox's is in the copse by the park wall, where none would ever look for it. If you would like a cub to play with, I will bring you one, or perhaps you want something more than cubs," he added, with his cunning laugh. "Aye, Thomas, I want much more. Man," she said fiercely, "will you do what I tell you?" "That depends, Mistress Emlyn. Have I not done what you told me all my life, and for no reward?" She moved across the chancel, and sat herself down against him, pushing the image door almost to and speaking to him through the crack. "If you have had no reward, Thomas," she said in a gentle voice, "whose fault was it? Not mine, I think. I loved you once when we were young, did I not? I would have given myself to you, body and soul, would I not? Well, who came between us and spoiled our lives?" "The monks," groaned Thomas, "the accursed monks, who married you to Stower because he paid them." "Yes, the accursed monks, and now our youth is gone, and love of that sort is behind us. I have been another man's wife, Thomas, who might have been yours. Think of it, your loving wife, the mother of your children. And you, they have tamed you and made you their servant, their cattle herd, the strong fellow to fetch and carry, the half-wit, as they call you, who can still be trusted to run an errand and hold his tongue, the Abbey mule that does not dare to kick, the grieve of your own stolen lands, you whose father was almost a gentleman. That's what they have done for you, Thomas, and for me, the church's ward. Well, I will not speak of it. Now, if you had your will, what would you do for them?" "Do for them! Do for them!" gasped Thomas, worked up to a fury by this recital of his wrongs. "Why, if I dared, I'd cut their throats every one, and gralloch them like deer," and he ground his strong white teeth. "But I'm afraid. They have my soul, and month by month I must confess. You remember, Emlyn, I warned you, and you and the lady would have ridden to London before the siege. Well, afterward, I must confess it, the abbot heard it himself, and oh, sore, sore was my penance. Before I had done with it, my ribs showed through my skin, and my back was like a red osier basket. There's only one thing I didn't tell them, because, after all, it is no sin to grub the earth off the face of a corpse." "Ah," said Emlyn, looking at him, "you are not to be trusted. Well, I thought as much. Good-bye, Thomas Bull, you coward. I'll find me a man for a friend, not a whimpering, priest-ridden hound, who sets a Latin blessing which he does not understand above his honour. God in heaven, to think I should ever have loved such a thing! Oh, I am shamed, I am shamed. I'll go wash my hands. Shut your trap and get you gone down your rat run, Thomas Bull, and living or dead, never dare to speak to me again. Also forget not to tell your monks how I called you to my side, for that's witchcraft, you know, and I shall burn for it, and your soul gain benefit. God in heaven, to think that once you were Thomas Bull." And she made as though to go away. He stretched out his great arm and caught her by the robe, exclaiming, "What would you have me do, Emlyn? I can't bear your scorn. Take it off me, or I go kill myself." "That's what you had best do. You'll find the devil a better master than a foreign abbot. Farewell forever." "Nay, nay, what's your will? Soul or no soul, I'll work it." "Will you? Will you indeed? If so, stay a moment." And she ran down the chapel, bolting the doors, then returned to him, saying, "Now come forth, Thomas, and since you are once more a man, kiss me as you used to do 20 years ago, and more. You'll not confess to that, will you? There." Now kneel before the altar here, and swear an oath. Nay, listen to it before you swear, for it is wide." Emlyn said the oath to him. It was a great and terrible oath. Under it he bound himself to be her slave, and to join himself with her in working woe to the monks of Blossholme, and especially to their abbot, Clement Malden, in payment of the wrongs that these had done to them both, in payment for the murder of Sir John Fotherell and of Christopher Harfleet, and of the imprisonment and robbery of Cicely Harfleet, the daughter of the one, and the wife of the other. He bound himself to do those things which she should tell him. He bound himself neither in the confessional nor, should it come to that, on the bed of torture or the scaffold, to breathe a word of all their counsel. He prayed that if he did so his soul might pay the price in everlasting torment, and of all these things he took heaven to be his witness. "Now," said Emlyn, when she had finished setting out this fearful vow, "will you be a man and swear, and thereby avenge the dead, and save the innocent from death? Or will you, who have had my secret, be a crawling monk, and go back to Blossholme Abbey and betray me?" He thought a moment, rubbing his red head, for the thing frightened him, as well it might. The scales of the balance of his mind hung evenly, and Emlyn knew not which way they would turn. She saw, and put out all her woman's strength. Resting her hand upon his shoulder, she leaned forward and whispered into his ear, "Do you remember, Thomas, how first we told our young love that spring day down in the copse by the water, and how sweet the daffodils bloomed about our feet, the daffodils and the wood lilies? Do you remember how we swore ourselves each to each for all our lives, aye, and all the lives that were to come, and how for us too the earth was turned to heaven? And then, do you remember how that monk walked by, it was this Clement Malden, and froze us with his cruel eyes, and said, 'What do you with a witch's daughter? She is not for you.' And, oh, Thomas, I can no more of it." And she broke down and sobbed, then added, "Swear nothing, get you gone and betray me if you will. I'll bear you no malice, even when I die for it, for after more than 20 years of monkcraft, how could I hope that you would still remain a man? Come, get you gone swiftly, ere they take us together, and your fair fame is besmirched. Quick now, and leave me, and my lady, and her unborn child to the doom Malden brews for us. Alas, for the copse by the river! Alas, for the withered lilies!" Thomas heard. The big blue veins stood out upon his forehead. His great breast heaved, his utterance choked. At length the words came in a thick torrent. "I'll not go, dearie. I'll swear what you will, by your eyes and by your lips, by the flowers on which we trod, by all the empty years of aching woe and shame, by God upon his throne in heaven, and by the devil in his fires in hell. Come, come!" And he ran to the altar, and clasped the crucifix that stood there. "Say the words again, or any others that you will, and I'll repeat them and take the oath, and may fiery worms eat me living for ever and for ever if I break a letter of it." With a little smile of triumph in her dark eyes, Emlyn bent over the kneeling man and whispered through the gathering gloom, while he whispered after her, and kissed the rood in token. It was done, and they drew away from the altar back to the painted saint. "So you are a man after all," she said, laughing aloud. "Now, man, my man, who, if we live through this, shall be my husband, if you will. Yes, my husband, for I'll pay, and be proud of it. Listen to my commands. See you, I am Moses, and yonder in the abbey sits Pharaoh with a hardened heart, and you are the angel, the destroying angel with the sword of the plagues of Egypt. Tonight there will be fire in the abbey, such fire as fell on Cranwell Towers. Nay, nay, I know, the church will not burn, nor all the great stone halls, but the dormitories, and the storehouses, and the hayricks, and the cattle byres, they'll flame bravely after this time of drought. And if the wains are ashes, how will they draw in their harvest? Will you do it, my man?" "Surely. Have I not sworn?" "Then away to the work, and afterwards, tomorrow or the next day, come back and make report. Just now I am much moved to solitary prayer, so wait till you see me here alone upon my knees. Stay! Wrap yourself in grave clothes, for then if you are seen they will think you are a ghost, such as they say haunt this place. Fear not, by then I will have more work for you. Have you mastered it?" He nodded his head. All, especially your promise. Oh, I'll not die now. I'll live to claim it." "Good, there's on account." And again she kissed him. "Go." He reeled in the intoxication of his joy, then said, "One word, my head swims, I forgot. Sir Christopher is not dead, or wasn't—" "What do you mean?" she almost hissed at him. "In Christ's name, be quick, I hear voices without." "They buried another man for Christopher. I scraped him up and saw. Christopher was sent for and sore wounded on the ship. Pest! I have forgotten its name. The same ship that took Geoffrey Stokes." "Blessings on your head for that tidings," exclaimed Emlyn in a strange, low voice. "Away! They are coming to the door." The wooden figure creaked to and stared at her blandly, as it had stared for generations. For a moment Emlyn stood still, her hand upon her heart. Then she walked swiftly down the chapel, unlocked the door, and in the porch, just entering it, met the Prioress Matilda, another nun, and old Bridget, who was chattering. "Oh, it is you, Mistress Stower," said Mother Matilda, with evident relief. "Sister Bridget here swore that she heard a man talking in the chapel when she came to shut the outer window at sunset." "Did she?" answered Emlyn indifferently. "Then her luck's better than my own, who long for the sound of a man's voice in this home of babbling women. Nay, be not shocked, good mother. I am no nun, and God did not create the world all female, or we should none of us be here. But now you speak of it, I think there's something strange about that chapel. It is a place where some might fear to be alone, for twice when I knelt there at my prayers I have heard odd sounds, and once, when there was no sun, a cold shadow fell upon me. Some ghost of the dead, I suppose, of whom so many lie about. Well, ghosts I never feared, and now I must away to fetch my lady's supper, for she eats in her room to-night." When she had gone, the prioress shook her head, and remarked in her gentle fashion, "A strange woman, and a rough, but, my sisters, we must not judge her harshly, for she is of a different world to ours, and I fear has met with sorrows there, such as we are protected from by our holy office." "Yes," answered the sister, "but I think also that she has met with the ghost that haunts the chapel, of which there are many records, and that once I saw myself when I was a novice. The Prioress Matilda, I mean the fourth of that name, she who was mixed up with Edward the Lame, the monk, and died suddenly after the— Peace, sister, let us have no scandal about that departed woman, who left the earth 200 years ago. Also, if her unquiet spirit still haunts the place, as many say, I know not why it should speak with the voice of a man." "Perhaps it was the monk Edward's voice that Bridget heard," replied the sister, "for no doubt he still hangs about her skirts as he did in life, if all tales are true. Well, Mistress Emlyn says that she does not mind ghosts, and I can well believe it, for she is a witch's daughter, and has a strange look in her eyes. Did you ever see such bold eyes, mother? However it may be, I hate ghosts, and rather would I pass a month on bread and water than be alone in that chapel at or after sundown. My back creeps to think of it, for they say that the unhallowed babe walks too, and gibbers round the font seeking baptism. Ah!" and she shuddered. "Peace, sister, peace to your goblin talk," said Mother Matilda again. "Let us think of holier things, lest the foul fiend draw near to us." That night, about 1 in the morning, the foul fiend drew very near to Blossholme, and he came in the shape of fire. Suddenly the nuns were aroused from their beds by the sound of bells tolling wildly. Running to the window places, they saw great sheets of flame leaping from the abbey roofs. They threw open the casements and stared out terrified. Sister Bridget was sent even to wake the deaf gardener and his wife, who lived in the gateway, and command them to go forth and learn what passed, and the meaning of the shouts they heard, for they feared that Blossholme was attacked by some army. A long while went by, and Bridget returned with a confused tale, which, as it had been gathered by an imbecile from a deaf gardener, was not easy to understand. Meanwhile the shoutings went on, and the fire at the abbey burnt ever more fiercely, so that the nuns thought that their last hour had come, and knelt down to pray at the casement. Just then Cicely and Emlyn appeared among them, and stared at the great fire. Suddenly Cicely turned round, and, fixing her large blue eyes on Emlyn, said, in the hearing of them all, "The abbey burns! Why, nurse, they told me that you said it would be so, yonder amid the ashes of Cranwell Towers. Surely you are foresighted." "Fire calls for fire," answered Emlyn grimly, and the nuns around looked at her with doubtful eyes. It was a very fierce fire, which appeared to have begun in the dormitories, whence, even at that distance, they saw half-clad monks escaping through the windows, some by means of bed-coverings tied together, and some by jumping, notwithstanding the height. Presently the roof of the building fell in, sending up showers of glowing embers, which lit upon the thatch of the farm byres and sheds, and upon the ricks built and building in the stackyard, so that all these caught also, and before dawn were utterly consumed. One by one the watchers in the nunnery, wearied of the lamentable sight, and muttering prayers, departed terrified to their beds. But Emlyn sat on at the open casement till the rim of the splendid September sun showed above the hills. There she sat, her head resting on her hand, her strong face set like that of a statue. Only her dark eyes, in which the flames were reflected, seemed to smile hardly. "Thomas is a good tool," she muttered to herself at length, "and the first cut is bitten to the bone. Well, there shall be worse to come. You will live to beg Emlyn's mercy yet, Clement Maldonado." End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 9. The Blossholme Witchings. On the afternoon of that day, the abbot came again to visit the nunnery, and sent for Cicely and Emlyn. They found him alone in the guest hall, walking up and down its length with a troubled face. "Cicely Fothergill," he said, without any form of greeting, "when last we met, you refused to sign the deed which I brought with me. Well, it matters nothing, for that purchaser has gone back upon his bargain." "Saying that he liked not the title?" suggested Cicely. "Ay, though who taught you of titles and the ins and outs of law? But what need to ask?" And he glowered at Emlyn. "Well, let it pass, for now I have a paper with me that you must sign. Read it if you will. It is harmless, only an instruction to the tenants of the lands your father held to pay their rents to me this Michaelmas, as warden of that property." "Do they refuse, then, seeing that you hold it all, my lord abbot?" "Ay, some one has been at work among them, and the stubborn churls will not without instruction under your hand and seal. The farms your father worked himself I have reaped, but last night every grain of corn and every fleece of wool were burned in the fire." "Then I pray you keep account of them, my lord, that you may pay me their value when we come to settle our score, seeing that I never gave you leave to shear my sheep and harvest my corn." "You are pleased to be saucy, girl," he replied, biting his lip. "I have no time to bandy words. Sign, and do you witness Emlyn Store." Cicely took the document, glanced at it, then slowly tore it into 4 pieces, and threw it to the floor. "Rob me and my unborn child if you can and will, at least I'll be no thief's partner," she said quietly. "Now if you want my name, go forge it, for I sign nothing." The abbot's face grew very evil. "Do you remember, woman," he asked, "that here you are in my power? Do you not know that rebellious sinners such as you are can be shut in a dark dungeon, and fed on the bread and water of affliction, and beaten with the rods of penance? Will you do my bidding, or shall these things fall on you?" Cicely's beautiful face flushed up, and for a moment her blue eyes filled with the tears of shame and terror. Then they cleared again, and she looked at him boldly, and answered, "I know that a murderer can be a torturer also. Why should not he who butchered the father scourge the daughter too? But I know also that there is a God who protects the innocent, though sometimes he is slow to lift his hand, and to him I appeal, my lord abbot. I know, moreover, that I am Fothergill and Carfax, and that no man or woman of my blood has ever yet yielded to fear or pain. I sign nothing." And, turning, she left the room. Now the abbot and Emlyn were alone. Suddenly, before she could speak, for her tongue was tied with rage, he began to rate and curse her, and to threaten horrible things against her and her mistress, such things as only a cruel Spaniard could imagine. At length he paused for breath, and she broke in. "Peace, wicked man, lest the roof fall on you, for I am sure that every cruel word you speak shall become a snake to strike you. Will you not take warning by what befell you last night, or must there be more such lessons?" "Oh ho," he answered, "so you know of that, do you? As I thought, your witchcraft was at work there." "How can I help knowing what the whole sky blazoned? The fat monks of Blossholme must draw their girdles tight this winter. Those stolen lands bring no luck, it seems, and John Fothergill's blood has turned to fire. Be warned, I say, be warned. Nay, I'll hear no more of your foul tongue. Lay a finger on that poor lady if you dare, and pay the price." And she too turned and went. Ere he left the nunnery, the abbot had an interview with Mother Matilda. Cicely must be disciplined, he said, gently at first, afterwards with roughness, even to scourging, if need were, for her soul's sake. Also her servant Emlyn must be kept away from her, for her soul's sake, since without doubt she was a dangerous witch. Also, when the time of the birth of the child came on, he would send a wise woman to wait upon her, one who was accustomed to such cases, for her body's sake and that of her child. In the midst of the great trouble that had fallen upon them through the terrible fire at the Abbey, which had cost them such fearful loss, to say nothing of the lives of 2 of the servants, and others burned and maimed, he had not much time to talk of such small things. But did she understand? Then it was that Mother Matilda, the meek and gentle, brought pain and astonishment to the heart of the Lord Abbot, her spiritual superior. She did not understand in the least. Such discipline as he suggested, whatever might be her faults and frailty, was, she declared with vigour, entirely unsuited to the case of the Lady Cicely, who, in her opinion, had suffered much for small cause, and who, moreover, was about to become a mother, and therefore should be treated with every gentleness. For her part, she washed her hands of the whole business, and rather than enforce such commands, would lay the case before the Vicar-General in London, who, she understood, was ready to look into such matters. Or at least she would set the Lady Harfleet and her servant outside the gates, and call upon the charitable to assist them. Of course, however, if his lordship chose to send a skilled woman to wait upon her in her trouble, she could have no objection, provided that this woman were a person of good repute. But in the circumstances it was idle to talk to her of bread and water and dark cells and scourgings. Such things should never happen while she was prioress. Before they did, she and her sisters would walk out of the nunnery, and leave the king's courts to judge of the matter. Now the state of the abbot was very like to that of a terrier dog, which, being accustomed to worry and torment a certain ewe sheep, comes upon the same after it has lambed, and finds a new creature, one that, instead of running in a fright, turns upon it, and, with head and hoof and all its weight of mutton, butts and leaps and tramples. Then what chance has that dog against the terrible and unsuspected fury of the sheep, born, as it thought, for it to tear? Then what can it do but run, panting and discomfited, to its kennel? So it was with the abbot at the onslaught of Mother Matilda in the defence of her lamb, Cicely. With Emlyn he had been prepared to exchange bite for bite, but Mother Matilda, his own pet quarry, it was too much. He could only go away, cursing all women and their infinite variety, on which no man might build. Who would have thought it of Mother Matilda, of all people on the earth? So it came to pass that at the nunnery, notwithstanding these terrible threats, things went on much as they had done before, since the times were such that even an all-powerful and remote Lord Abbot, with right of gallows, could not drive matters to an extremity. Cicely was not shut into the dungeon and fed on bread and water, much less was she scourged. Nor was she separated from her nurse Emlyn, although it is true that the prioress reproved her for her resistance to established authority, and when she had finished her lecture, kissed and blessed her, and called her sweet child, her dove and joy. But if there was sameness at the nunnery, at the abbey there was constant change and excitement. Only 3 days after the fire, the great flock of 800 lambs rushed one night over the red cliff on the fell, where, as all shepherds in that country know, there is a sheer drop of 40 feet. Never was lamb's flesh so cheap in Blossholme and the country round as on the morrow of that night, while every hind within 10 miles could have a winter coat for the skinning. Moreover, it was said and sworn to by the shepherds that the devil himself, with horns and hoofs, and mounted on a jackass, had been seen driving the same lambs. Next the ghost of Sir John Fotterel appeared, clad in armour, sometimes mounted and sometimes afoot, but always at night time. First this dreadful spirit was perceived walking in the gardens of Shefton Hall, where it met the abbot's caretaker, for the place was now shut up, as he went to set a springe for hares. He was a man advanced in years, yet few horses ever covered the distance between Shefton and Blossholme Abbey more quickly than he did that night. Nor would he or any other return to his charge, so that henceforth Shefton was left as a dwelling for the ghost, which, as all might see from time to time, shone in the window places like a candle. Moreover, the said ghost travelled far and wide, for on dark, windy nights it knocked upon the doors of those that in its lifetime had been its tenants, and in a hollow voice declared that it had been murdered by the abbot of Blossholme and his underlings, who held its daughter in durance, and, under threats of unearthly vengeance, commanded all men to bring him to justice, and to pay him neither fees nor homage. So much terror did this ghost cause that Thomas Bull, the swift of foot, was set to watch for it, and returned announcing that he had seen it, and that it called him by his name, whereon he, being a bold fellow, and believing that it was but a man, sent an arrow straight through it, at which it laughed, and forthwith vanished away. Moreover, in proof of these things, he led the abbot and his monks to the very place, and showed them where he had stood and where the ghost stood, yes, and the arrow, of which all the feathers had been mysteriously burnt off, and the wood seared as though by fire, sunk deep into a tree beyond. Then, as this thing had become a scandal and a dread, the abbot, in his robes, solemnly laid the ghost, Thomas Bull showing him exactly where it had passed. This spirit being well and truly laid, like a foundation stone, the abbot and his monks returned homeward through the wood, but as they went a dreadful voice, which all recognized as that of Sir John Fothergill, called these words from the shadows of an impenetrable thicket, for now the night was falling: "Clement Maldonado, abbot of Blossholme, I, whom thou didst murder, summon thee to meet me within a year before the throne of God." Thereon all fled. Yes, even the abbot fled, or rather, as he said, his horse did, Thomas Bull, who had lagged behind, outrunning them every one, and getting home the first, saying Aves as he went. After this, although the whole countryside hunted for it, Sir John's ghost was seen no more. Doubtless its work was done, but the abbot explained matters differently. Other and worse things were seen, however. One moonlight night a disturbance was heard among the cows, that bellowed and rushed about the field into which they had been turned after milking. Thinking that dogs had got amongst them, the herd and a watchman, for now no man would stir alone after sunset at Blossholme, went to see what was happening, and presently fell down half dead with fright. For there, leaning over the gate and laughing at them, was the foul fiend himself, the fiend with horns and tail, and in his hand an instrument like a pitchfork. How the pair got home again they never knew, but this is certain, that after that night no one could milk those cows. Moreover, some of them slipped their calves, and became so wild that they must be slaughtered. Next came rumors that even the nunnery itself was haunted, especially the chapel. Here voices were heard talking, and Emlyn Stower, who was praying there, came out vowing that she had seen a ball of fire which rolled up and down the aisle, and in the center of it a man's head, that seemed to try to talk to her, but could not. Into this matter inquiry was held by the abbot himself, who asked Emlyn if she knew the face that was in the ball of fire. She answered that she thought so. It seemed very like to that of one of his own guards, named Andrew Woods, or more commonly, Drunken Andrew, a Scotchman whom Sir Christopher Harfleet was said to have killed on the night of the great burning. At least his lordship would remember that this Andrew had a broken nose, and so had the head in the fire, but, as it appeared to have changed a great deal since death, she could not be quite certain. All she was sure of was that it seemed to be trying to give her some message. Now, recalling the trick that had been played with the said Andrew's body, the abbot was silent. Only he asked shrewdly if Emlyn had seen so terrible a thing there, how it came about that she was not afraid to be alone in the chapel, which he was informed she frequented much. She answered with a laugh, that it was men she dreaded, not spirits, good or ill. "No," he exclaimed, with a burst of rage, "you do not dread them, woman, because you are a witch, and summon them, nor shall we be free from these wizardries until the fire has you in your company." "If so," replied Emlyn coolly, "I will ask dead Andrew for his message to you next time we meet, unless he chooses to deliver it to you himself." So they parted. But that very night there happened the worst thing of all. It was about 1 in the morning when the abbot, whose window was set open, was wakened by a voice that spoke with a Scotch accent, and repeatedly called him by his name, summoning him to look out and see. He and others rose and looked, but could see nothing, for the night was very dark, and rain fell. When the dawn came, however, their search was rewarded, for there, set upon a pinnacle of the abbey church, and staring straight into the window of his lordship's sleeping-room, from which it was but a few yards distant, was the dreadful head of Andrew Woods. Furiously the abbot asked who had done this horrible thing, but the monks, who were sure that it was the same being that had bewitched the cows, only shrugged their heads, and suggested that the grave of Andrew should be opened to see if he had lost his head. This was done at length, although, for his own reasons, the abbot forbade it, talking of the violation of the dead. Well, the grave was open when Malden was away on one of his mysterious journeys, and lo! no Andrew was there, but only a beam of oak wood stuffed out with straw to the shape of a man and sewn up in a blanket. For the real Andrew, or rather what was left of him, lay, it may be remembered, in another grave that was supposed to be filled by Sir Christopher Harfleet. From that day forward, the whole countryside for 50 miles round rang with the tales of what were known as the Blossholme witchings, of which a proof was still to be seen by all men in the withered head of Andrew perched upon its pinnacle, whence none could be found to remove it for love or money. Only it was noted that the abbot changed his sleeping chamber, after which, except for a sickness which struck the monks, it was thought from the drinking of sour beer, these bedevilments were abated. Indeed, at that time men had other things to think of, since the air was thick with rumours of impending change. The king threatened the church, and the church prepared to resist the king. There was talk of the suppression of the monasteries. Some, in fact, had already been suppressed, and more talk of a rising in the faithful in the shires of York and Lincoln, high matters which called Abbot Malden much away from home. One day he returned weary, but satisfied, from a long journey, and amongst the news that awaited him found a message from the prioress, over which he pondered while he ate his food. Also there was a letter from Spain, which he studied eagerly. Some 9 months had passed since the ship Great Yarmouth sailed, and during this time all that had been heard of her was that she had never reached Seville, so that, like everyone else, the abbot believed she had foundered in the deep seas. This was a sad event, which he had borne with resignation, seeing that, although it meant the loss of his letters, which were of importance, she had aboard of her several persons whom he wished to see no more, especially Sir Christopher Harfleet and Sir John Fotherell's serving man, Geoffrey Stokes, who was said to carry with him certain inconvenient documents. Even his secretary and chaplain, Brother Martin, could be spared, being, Malden felt, a character better suited to heaven than to an earth where the best of men must be prepared sometimes to compromise with conscience. In short, the vanishing of the Great Yarmouth was the wise decree of a far-seeing Providence, that had removed certain stumbling blocks from his feet, which of late had been forced to travel over a rough and thorny road. For the dead tell no tales, although it was true that the ghost of Sir John Fotherell and the grinning head of drunken Andrew on his pinnacle seemed to be instances to the contrary. Christopher Harfleet and Geoffrey Stokes at the bottom of the Bay of Biscay could bring no awkward charges, and left him none to deal with save an imprisoned and forgotten girl and an unborn child. Now things were changed again, however, for the Spanish letter in his hand told him that the Great Yarmouth had not sunk, since 2 members of her crew who escaped, how it was not said, declared that she had been captured by Turkish or other infidel pirates, and taken away through the Straits of Gibraltar to some place unknown. Therefore, if he had survived the voyage, Christopher Harfleet might still be living, and so might Geoffrey Stokes and Brother Martin. Yet this was not likely, for probably they would have perished in the fight, being hot-headed Englishmen, all 3 of them, or at the best have been committed to the Turkish galleys, whence not 1 man in 1,000 ever returned. On the whole, then, he had little cause to fear them, who were dead, or as good as dead, especially in the midst of so many more pressing dangers. All he had to fear, all that stood between him, or rather the church, and a very rich inheritance, was the girl in the nunnery, and an unborn child, and, yes, Emlyn Stower. Well, he was sure that child would not live, and probably the mother would not live. As for Emlyn, as she deserved, she would be burned for a witch, ere long too, now that he had time to see to it, and, if she survived her sickness, although he grieved for her, Cicely, her accomplice, should justly accompany her to the stake. Meanwhile, as Mother Matilda's message told him, this matter of the child was urgent. The abbot called a monk who was waiting on him, and bade him send word to a woman known as Goody Meggs, bidding her come at once. Within 10 minutes she entered, having, as she explained, been warned to be close at hand. This Goody Meggs, who had some local repute as a wise woman, was a person of about 50 years of age, remarkable for her enormous size, a flat face with small oblong eyes, and a little twisted mouth, which had caused her to be nicknamed the Flounder. She greeted the abbot with much reverence, curtsying till he thought she would fall backwards, and having received his fatherly blessing, sank into a chair, that seemed to vanish beneath her bulk. "You will wonder why I summon you here, friend, since this is no place for the service of those of your trade," began the abbot with a smile. "Oh, no, my lord," answered the woman. "I've heard it is to wait upon Sir Christopher Harfleet's wife in her trouble." "I wish that I could call her by the honoured name of wife," said the abbot with a sigh, "but a mock marriage does not make a wife, Mistress Meggs, and alas, the poor babe, if ever it should be born, will be but a bastard, marked from its birth with the brand of shame." Now the flounder, who was no fool, began to take her cue. "It is sad, very sad, your holiness. No, that's wrong. But never mind. It will be all right before all's done, and a good omen, I say, coming so sudden and chancy, your lordship, I mean. Not but what there's lots of the sort round here, as is generally the case round everywhere. Moreover, they generally grow up bad and ungrateful, as I know well from my own three, not but what, of course, I was married fast enough. Well, what I was going to say was, that when things is so, sometimes it is a true blessing if the poor little innocents should go off at the first, and so be spared the finger of shame and the sniff of scorn." And she paused. "Yes, Mistress Meggs, or at least, in such a case, it is not for us to rail at the decree of heaven, provided, of course, that the infant has lived long enough to be baptized," he added hastily. "No, your eminence, no. That's just what I said to that Smith girl last spring, when, being a heavy sleeper, I happened to overlie her brat and woke up to find it flat and blue. When she saw it, she took on, bellowing like a heifer that has lost its first calf, and I said to her, 'Mary, this isn't me, it's heaven. Mary, you should be very thankful, since my burden has rid you of your burden, and you can bury such a tiny one for next to nothing. Mary, cry a little if you like, for that's natural with the first, but don't come your flying in the face of heaven with your railings, and gates, and posts, especially the rails, for heaven hates 'em.'" "Ah," asked the abbot, with mild interest. "And pray, what did Mary do then?" "Do, the graceless wench? Why, she said, 'Is it rails you're talking of, you pig-smothering old sow? Then here's a rail for you,' and she pulled the top bar off my own fence, for we were talking by the door, oak it was, and 3x2, and knocked me flat, here's the scar of it on my head, singing out, 'Is that enough, or will you have the gate and the post too? Oh, if there's one thing I hate, it is railing, specially if made of hard oak and held edgewise.'" So the wicked old hag babbled on, after her hideous fashion, while the abbot stared at the ceiling. When at length she paused for lack of breath, he said, "Enough of these sad stories of vice and violence. Such mischances will happen, and of course you were not to blame. Now, good Mistress Meggs, will you undertake this case, which cannot be left to ignorant nuns? Though times are hard here, since of late many losses have fallen on our house, your skill shall be well paid." The woman shuffled her big feet, and stared at the floor, then looked up suddenly with a glance that seemed to bore to his heart like a broadawl, and asked, "And if perchance the blessed babe should fly to heaven through my fingers, as in my time I have known dozens of them to do, should I still get that pay?" "Then," the abbot answered, with a smile, a somewhat sickly smile, "then I think, mistress, you should have double pay, to console you for your sorrow, and for any doubts that might be thrown upon your skill." "Now that's noble trading," she replied, with an evil leer, "such as one might hope for from an abbot. But, my lord, they say the nunnery is haunted, and I can't face ghosts. Man or woman, with rails or without 'em, Mother Flounder doesn't mind, but ghosts, no. Also, Mr. Stower is a witch, and might lay a curse on me, and those nuns are full of crinks and cranks, and can pray an honest soul to death." "Come, come, my time is short. What is it you want, woman? Out with it." "The inn there at the ford, your lordship, will need a tenant next month. It's a good paying house for those who know how to keep their mouths shut, and to look the other way, and through vile scandal and evil slanderers, such as the Smith girl, my business isn't what it was. Now if I could have it without rent for the first 2 years, till I had time to work up the trade—" The abbot, who could bear no more of the creature, rose from his chair and said sharply, "I will remember. Yes, I will promise. Go now. The Reverend Mother has advised of your coming. And report to me, night and morning, of the progress of the case. Why, woman, what are you doing?" For she had suddenly slid to her knees, and grasped his robes with her thick, filthy hands. "Absolution, holy lordship! I ask absolution and blessing, pax megiscum, and the rest of it." "Absolution? There is nothing to absolve." "Oh, yes, my lord, there is plenty, though I am wondering who will absolve you for your half. Also, there are rows of little angels that sometimes won't let me sleep, and that's why I can't stomach ghosts. I'd rather sup in winter on cold small ale and half-cooked pork than face even a stillborn ghost." "Begone!" said the abbot, in such a voice that she scrambled to her feet, and went, unblessed and unabsolved. When the door had closed behind her, he went to the window and flung it wide, although the night was foul. "By all the saints," he muttered, "that beastly murderess poisons the air. Why, I wonder, does God allow such filthy things to live? Cannot she ply her hell trade less grossly? Oh, Clement Maldonado, how low are you sunk that you must use tools like these, and on such a business? And yet there is no other way. Not for myself, but for the church. O Lord! The great plot thickens, and all men clamor to me, its head and spring, for money. Give me money, and within 6 months Yorkshire and the North will be up, and within a year Henry the Antichrist will be dead, and the Princess Mary fast upon the throne, with the Emperor and the Pope for watchdogs. That stiff-necked Cicely must die, and her babe must die, and then I'll twist the secret of the jewels out of the witch Emlyn, on the rack if need be. Those jewels, I've seen them often, why, they would feed an army, but while Cicely or her brat lives, where is my claim to them? So, alas! They must die, but oh, the Hag is right. Who shall give me absolution for a deed I hate? Not for me, O my patron, but for the church." And flinging himself to the floor before the holy image of his chosen saint, he rested his head upon its feet, and wept. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 10. Mother Meigs and the Ghost. Flounder Meigs, with all the paraphernalia of her trade, was established as nurse to Cicely at the nunnery. This establishment, it is true, had not been easy, since Emlyn, who knew something of the woman's repute and suspected more, resisted it with all her strength. But here the prioress intervened in her gentle way. She herself, she explained, did not like this person, who looked so odd, drank so much beer, and talked so fast. Yet she had made inquiries, and found that she was extraordinarily skilled in matters of that nature. Indeed, it was said that she had succeeded in cases that were wonderfully difficult, which the leech had abandoned as hopeless, though, of course, there had been other cases where she had not succeeded. But these, she was informed, were generally those of poor people who did not pay her well. Now in this instance her pay would be ample, for she, Mother Matilda, had promised her a splendid fee out of her private store, and for the rest, since no man-doctor might enter there, who else was competent? Not she or the other nuns, for none of them had been married save old Bridget, who was silly, and had long ago forgotten all such things. Not Emlyn even, who was but a girl when her own child was born, and since then had been otherwise employed. Therefore there was no choice. To this reasoning Emlyn agreed perforce, although she mistrusted her of the fat wretch, whose appearance poor Cicely also disliked. Still, for very fear, Emlyn was humble and civil to her, for if she were not, who could know if she would put out all her skill upon behalf of her mistress? Therefore she did her bidding like a slave, and spiced her beer, and made her bed, and even listened to her foul jests and talk unmurmuringly. The business was over at length, and the child, a noble boy, born into the world. Had not the flounder produced it in triumph, laid upon a little basket covered with a lambskin, and had not Emlyn and Mother Matilda and all the nuns kissed and blessed it? Had it not also, for fear of accident, such was the fatherly forethought of the abbot, been baptized at once by a priest who was waiting, under the names of John Christopher Fotterell, John after its grandfather, and Christopher after its father, with Fotterell for a surname, since the abbot would not allow that it should be called Harfleet, being, as he averred, base-born. So this child was born, and Mother Meigs swore that of all the 203 that she had issued into the world it was the finest, 9½ pounds in weight at the very least. Also, as its voice and movements testified, it was lusty and like to live. For did not the flounder, in sight of all the wondering nuns, hold it up hanging by its hands to her 2 fat forefingers, and afterwards drink a whole quart of spiced ale to its health and long life? But if the babe was like to live, Cicely was like to die. Indeed, she was very, very ill, and perhaps would have passed away had it not been for a device of Emlyn's. For when she was at her worst, and the flounder, shaking her head and saying that she could do no more, had departed to her eternal ale and a nap, Emmeline crept up and took her mistress's cold hand. "Darling," she said, "hear me." But Cicely did not stir. "Darling," she repeated, "hear me. I have news for you of your husband." Cicely's white face turned a little on the pillow, and her blue eyes opened. "Of my husband?" she whispered. "Why, he is gone, as I soon shall be. What news of him?" "That he is not gone, that he lives, or so I believe, though heretofore I have hid it from you." The head was lifted for a moment, and the eyes stared at her with wondering joy. "Do you trick me, nurse? Nay, you would never do that. Give me the milk. I want it now. I'll listen. I promise you I'll not die till you have told me. If Christopher lives, why should I die, who only hope to find him?" So Emmeline whispered all she knew. It was not much, only that Christopher had not been buried in the grave where he was said to be buried, and that he had been taken wounded aboard the ship Great Yarmouth. Of the fate of which ship, fortunately, she had heard nothing. Still, slight as they may be, to Cicely these tidings were a magic medicine, for did they not mean the rebirth of hope? Hope that for 9 long months had been dead and buried with Christopher? From that moment she began to mend. When the flounder, having slept off her drink, returned to the sick-bed, she stared at her amazed, and muttered something about witchcraft, she who had been sure that she would die, as in those days so many women did who fell into hands like hers. Indeed, she was bitterly disappointed, knowing that this death was desired by her employer, who now, after all, might let the Ford in to another. Moreover, the child was no waster, but one who was set for life. Well, that at least she could mend, and if it were done quickly, the shock might kill the mother. Yet the thing was not so easy as it looked, for there were many loving eyes upon that babe. When she wished to take it to her bed at night, Emmeline forbade her fiercely, and on being appealed to, the prioress, who knew the creature's drunken habits, and had heard rumours of the fate of the Smith infant and others, gave orders that it was not to be. So, since the mother was too weak to have it with her, the boy was laid in a little cot at her side. And always, day and night, one or more of the sweet-faced nuns stood at the head of that cot, watching as might a guardian angel. Also, it took only nature's food, since from the first Cicely would nurse it, so that she could not mix any drug with its milk that would cause it to sleep itself away. So the days went on, bringing black wrath, despair almost, to the heart of Mother Meigs, till at length there came the chance she sought. One fine evening, when the nuns were gathered at vespers, but as it happened not in the chapel, because since the tale of the hauntings they shunned the place after high noon, Cicely, whose strength was returning to her, asked Emmeline to change her garments and remake her bed. Meanwhile, the babe was given to Sister Bridget, who doted on it, with instructions to take it to walk in the garden for a time, since the rain had passed off, and the afternoon was now very soft and pleasant. So she went, and there presently was met by the flounder, who was supposed to be asleep, but had followed her, a person of whom the half-witted Bridget was much afraid. "What are you doing with my babe, old fool?" she screeched at her, thrusting her fat face to within an inch of the nun's. "You'll let it fall, and I shall be blamed. Give me the angel, I will twist your nose for you. Give it me, I say, and get you gone." In her fear and flurry, old Bridget obeyed, and departed at a run. Then, recovering herself a little, or drawn by some instinct, she returned, hid herself in a clump of lilac bushes, and watched. Presently she saw the flounder, after glancing about to make sure that she was alone, enter the chapel, carrying the child, and heard her bolt the door after her. Now Bridget, as she said afterwards, grew very frightened, she knew not why, and, acting on impulse, ran to the chancel window, and, climbing on a wheelbarrow that stood there, looked through it. This was what she saw. Mother Meigs was kneeling in the chancel, as she thought at first, to say her prayers, till she perceived, for a ray from the setting sun showed it all, that on the pavement before her lay the infant, and that this she-devil was thrusting her thick forefinger down its throat, for already it grew black in the face, and as she thrust muttering savagely. So horror-struck was Bridget that she could neither move nor cry. Then, while she stood petrified, suddenly there appeared the figure of a man in rusty armour. The flounder looked up, saw him, and, withdrawing her finger from the mouth of the child, let out yell after yell. The man, who said nothing, drew a sword and lifted it, whereon the murderess screamed, "The ghost! The ghost! Spare me, Sir John! I am poor, and he paid me! Spare me for Christ's sake!" And so saying, she rolled onto the floor in a fit, and there turned and twisted until she lay still. Then the man, or the ghost of a man, having looked at her, sheathed his sword and lifted up the babe, which now drew its breath again and cried, marched with it down the aisle. The next thing of which Bridget became aware was that he stood before her, the infant in his arms, holding it out to her. His face she could not see, for the visor was down, but he spoke in a hollow voice, saying, "This gift from heaven to the Lady Harfleet. Bid her fear nothing, for one devil I have garnered, and others are ripe for reaping." Bridget took the child and sank down onto the ground, and at that moment the nuns, alarmed by the awful yells, rushed through the side door, headed by Mother Matilda. They too saw the figure, and knew the federal cognizance upon its helm and shield, but it waited not to speak to them, only passed behind some trees and vanished. Their first care was for the infant, which they thought the man was stealing. Then, after they were sure that it had taken no real hurt, they questioned old Bridget, but could get nothing from her, for all she did was to gibber and point first to the barrow and next to the chancel window. At length Mother Matilda understood, and, climbing onto the barrow, looked through the window as Bridget had done. She looked, she saw, and fell back fainting. An hour had gone by. The child, unhurt save for a little bruising of its tender mouth, was asleep upon its mother's breast. Bridget, having recovered, at length had told all her tale to every one of them save Cicely, who as yet knew nothing, for she and Emlyn did not hear the screams, their room being on the other side of the building. The abbot had been sent for, and, accompanied by monks, arrived in the midst of a thunderstorm and pouring rain. He too had heard the tale, heard it with pale face, while his monks crossed themselves. At length he asked of the woman Meggs. They replied that living or dead she was, as they supposed, still in the chapel, which none of them had dared to enter. "Come, let us see," said the abbot, and they went there to find the door locked, as Bridget had said. Smiths were sent for, and broke it in while all stood in the pouring rain and watched. It was open at last, and they entered with torches and tapers, for now the darkness was dense, the abbot leading them. They came to the chancel, where something lay upon the floor, and held down the torches to look. Then they saw that which caused them all to turn and fly, calling on the saints to protect them. In her life Mother Meggs had not been lovely, but in the death that had overtaken her. It was morning. The Lord Abbot and his monks were assembled in the guest chamber, and opposite to them were the Lady Prioress and her nuns, and with them Emlyn. "Witchcraft!" shouted the abbot, smiting his fist upon the table. "Black witchcraft! Satan himself and his foulest demons walk the countryside, and have their home in this nunnery. Last night they manifested themselves—" "By saving a babe from a cruel death, and bringing a hateful murderess to doom," broke in Emlyn. "Silence, sorceress!" shouted the abbot. "Get thee behind me, Satan! I know you and your familiars!" And he glared at the prioress. "What may you mean, my lord abbot?" asked Mother Matilda, bridling up. "My sisters and I do not understand. Emlyn Stower is right. Do you call that witchcraft, which works so good an end? The ghost of Sir John Fothergill appeared here, we admit it, who saw that ghost. But what did the spirit do? It slew the hellish woman whom you sent among us, and it rescued the blessed babe when her finger was down its throat to choke out its pure life. If that be witchcraft, I stand by it. Tell us, what did the wretch mean when she cried out to the spirit to save her, because she was poor, and had been bribed for her iniquity? Who bribed her, my lord abbot? None in this house, I'll swear. And who changed Sir John Fothergill from flesh to spirit? Why is he a ghost today?" "Am I here to answer riddles, woman? And who are you that you dare put such questions to me? I depose you. I set your house under ban. The judgment of the church shall be pronounced against you all. Dare not to leave your doors until the court is composed to try you. Think not you shall escape. Your English land is sick, and heresy stalks abroad. But," he added slowly, "fire can still bite, and there is store of faggots in the woods. Prepare your souls for judgment. Now I go." "Do as it pleases you," answered the enraged Mother Matilda. "When you set out your case, we will answer it. But meanwhile we pray that you take what is left of your dead hireling with you, for we find her ill company, and here she shall have no burial. My lord abbot, the charter of this nunnery is from the monarch of England, whatever authority you and those that went before you had usurped. It was granted by the first Edward, and the appointment of every prioress since his day has been signed by the sovereign and no other. I hold mine under the manual of the 8th Henry. You cannot depose me, for I appeal from the abbot to the king. Fare you well, my lord. And, followed by her little train of aged nuns, she swept from the room like an offended queen. After the terrible death of the child murderess, and the restoration of her babe to her unharmed, Cicely's recovery was swift. Within a week she was up and walking, and within 10 days as strong or stronger than ever she had been. Nothing more had been heard of the abbot, and though all knew that danger threatened them from this quarter, they were content to enjoy the present hour of peace, and wait till it was at hand. But in Cicely's awakened mind there arose a keen desire to learn more of what her nurse had hinted to her when she lay upon the very edge of death. Day by day she plied Emlyn with questions, till at length she knew all, namely, that the tidings came from Thomas Bull, and that he, dressed in her father's armour, was the ghost who had saved her boy from death. Now nothing would serve her but that she must see Thomas herself, as she said, to thank him, though truly, as Emlyn knew well, to draw from his own lips every detail and circumstance that she could gather concerning Christopher. For a while Emlyn held out against her, for she knew the dangers of such a meeting, but in the end, being able to refuse her lady nothing, she gave way. At length, at the appointed hour of sunset, Emlyn and Cicely stood in the chapel, whither the latter told the nuns she wished to go to return thanks for her deliverance from many dangers. They knelt before the altar, and while they made pretence to pray there, heard knocks, which were the signal of the presence of Thomas Bull. Emlyn answered them with other knocks, which told that all was safe, whereon the wooden image turned, and Thomas appeared, dressed as before in Sir John Fotterell's armour. So like did he seem to her dead father in this familiar mail, that for a moment Cicely thought it must be he, and her knees trembled until he knelt before her, kissing her hand, asking after her health and that of the infant, and whether she were satisfied with his service. Indeed, and indeed, yes, she answered, and oh, friend, all that I have henceforth is yours, should I ever have anything again, who am but a prison beggar. Meanwhile, my blessing and that of heaven rest upon you, you gallant man. Thank me not, lady, answered the honest Thomas. To speak truth, it was Emlyn whom I served, for though monks parted us, we have been friends for many a year. As for the matter of the child, and that spawn of hell, the flounder, be grateful to God, not to me, for it was by mere chance that I came here that evening, which I had not intended to do. I was going about my business with the cattle, when something seemed to tell me to arm and come. It was as though a hand pushed me, and the rest you know, and so I think by now does Mother Meggs, he added grimly. Yes, yes, Thomas, and in truth I do thank God, whose finger I see in all this business, as I thank you, his instrument. But there are other things whereof Emlyn has spoken to me. She said my husband, whom I thought slain and buried, in truth was only wounded and not buried, but shipped oversea. Tell me that story, friend, omitting nothing, but swiftly, for our time is short. I thirst to hear it from your own lips. So in his slow, wandering way he told her, word by word, all that he had seen, all that he had learned, and the sum of it was that Sir Christopher had been shipped abroad upon the Great Yarmouth, sorely wounded but not dead, and that with him had sailed Geoffrey Stokes and the monk Martin. That's 10 months gone, said Cicely. Has not been heard of this ship? By now she should be home again. Thomas hesitated, then answered, No tidings came of her from Spain. Then, although I said nothing of it even to Emlyn, she was reported lost with all hands at sea. Then came another story. Ah, that other story? Lady, 2 of her crew reached the Wash. I did not see them, and they have shipped again from Marseille in France. But I spoke with a shepherd who is half-brother to one of them, and he told me that from him he learned that the Great Yarmouth was set upon by 2 Turkish pirates, and captured after a brave fight, in which the Captain Goody and others were killed. This man and his comrade escaped in a boat, and drifted to and fro till they were picked up by a homeward-bound caravel which landed them at Hull. That's all I know, save one thing. One thing? Oh, what thing, Thomas? That my husband is dead? Nay, nay, the very opposite, that he is alive, or was, for these men saw him, and Geoffrey Stokes and Martin the priest, no craven, as I know, fighting like devils till the Turks overwhelmed them by numbers, and having bound their hands, carried them all three unwounded on board one of their ships, wishing doubtless to make slaves of such brave fellows. Now, although Emlyn would have stopped her, still Cicely plied him with questions, which he answered as best he could, till suddenly a sound caught his ear. "Look at the window!" he exclaimed. They looked, and saw a sight that froze their blood, for there staring at them through the glass was the dark face of the abbot, and with it other faces. "Betray me not, or I shall burn," he whispered. "Say only that I came to haunt you." And silently as a shadow he glided to his niche, and was gone. "What now, Emlyn?" "One thing only. Thomas must be saved. A bold face, and stand to it. Is it our fault if your father's ghost should haunt this chapel? Remember, your father's ghost, no other. Ah, here they come." As she spoke, the door was thrown wide, and through it came the abbot and his rout of attendants. Within 2 paces of the women they halted, hanging together like bees, for they were afraid, while a voice cried, "Seize the witches!" Cicely's terror passed from her, and she faced them boldly. "What would you with us, my lord abbot?" she asked. "We would know, sorceress, what shape was that which spoke with you but now, and whither has it gone?" "The same that saved my child, and called the sword of God down upon the murderess. It wore my father's armor, but its face I did not see. It has gone whence it came, but where that is I know not. Discover if you can." "Woman, you trifle with us. What said the thing?" "It spoke of the slaughter of Sir John Fotherell by Kingsgrave Mount, and of those who wrought it." And she looked at him steadily, until his eyes fell before hers. "What else?" "It told me that my husband is not dead. Neither did you bury him, as you put about, but shipped him hence to Spain, whence it prophesied he will return again to be revenged upon you. It told me that he was captured by the infidel Moors, and with him Geoffrey Stokes, my father's servant, and the priest Martin, your secretary. Then it looked up and vanished, or seemed to vanish, though perhaps it is among us now." "Ay," answered the abbot, "Satan, with whom you hold converse, is always among us. Cicely Fotherell and Emlyn Stower, you are foul witches, self-confessed. The world has borne your sorceries too long, and you shall answer for them before God and man, as I, the Lord Abbot of Blossholme, have right and authority to make you do. Seize these witches, and let them be kept fast in their chamber till I constitute the court ecclesiastic for their trial." So they took hold of Cicely and Emlyn, and led them to the nunnery. As they crossed the garden, they were met by Mother Matilda and the nuns, who, for a second time within a month, ran out to see what was the tumult in the chapel. "What is it now, Cicely?" asked the prioress. "Now we are witches, mother," she answered, with a sad smile. "Ay," broke in Emlyn, "and the charge is that the ghost of the murdered Sir John Fotherell was seen speaking to us." Why," exclaimed the prioress, "if the spirit of a woman's father appears to her, is she therefore to be declared a witch? Then is poor sister Bridget a witch also, for this same spirit brought the child to her." "Ay," said the abbot, "I had forgotten her. She is another of the crew, let her be seized and shut up also. Greatly do I hope, when it comes to the hour of trial, that there may not be found to be more of them." And he glanced at the poor nuns with menace in his eye. So Cicely and Emlyn were shut within their room, and strictly guarded by monks, but otherwise not ill-treated. Indeed, save for their confinement, there was little change in their condition. The child was allowed to be with Cicely. The nuns were allowed to visit her. Only over both of them hung the shadow of great trouble. They were aware, and as it seemed to them purposely suffered to be aware, that they were about to be tried for their lives upon monstrous and obscene charges, namely, that they had consorted with a dim and awful creature called the enemy of mankind, whom, it was supposed, human beings had power to call to their counsel and assistance. To them who knew well that this being was Thomas Bull, the thing seemed absurd. Yet it cannot be denied that the said Thomas, at Emlyn's instigation, had worked much evil on the monks of Blossholme, paying them, or rather their abbot, back in his own coin. Yet what was to be done? To tell the facts would be to condemn Thomas to some fearful fate, which even then they would be called upon to share, although possibly they might be cleared of the charge of witchcraft. Emlyn set the matter before Cicely, urging neither one side nor the other, and waited her judgment. It was swift and decisive. "This is a coil that we cannot untangle," said Cicely. "Let us betray no one, but put our trust in God. I am sure," she added, "that God will help us as he did when Mother Meggs would have murdered my boy. I shall not attempt to defend myself by wronging others. I leave everything to him." "Strange things have happened to many who trusted in God. To that the whole evil world bears witness," said Emlyn doubtfully. "May be," answered Cicely, in her quiet fashion. "Perhaps because they did not trust enough, or rightly. At least there lies my path, and I will walk in it, to the fire if need be." "There is some seed of greatness in you. To what will it grow, I wonder?" replied Emlyn, with a shrug of her shoulders. On the morrow this faith of Cicely's was put to a sharp test. The abbot came and spoke with Emlyn apart. This was the burden of his song: "Give me those jewels, and all may yet be well with you and your mistress, vile witches though you are. If not, you burn." As before, she denied all knowledge of them. "Find me the jewels, or you burn," he answered. "Would you pay your lives for a few miserable gems?" Now Emlyn weakened, not for her own sake, and said she would speak with her mistress. He bade her do so. "I thought that those jewels were burned, Emlyn. Do you then know where they are?" asked Cicely. "Aye, I have said nothing of it to you, but I know. Speak the word, and I give them up to save you." Cicely thought a while, and kissed her child, which she held in her arms, then laughed aloud, and answered, "Not so! That abbot shall never be richer for any gem of mine. I have told you in what I trust, and it is not jewels. Whether I burn or whether I am saved, he shall not have them." "Good," said Emlyn. "That is my mind also. I only spoke for your sake." And she went out and told the abbot. He came into Cicely's chamber and raged at them. He said that they should be excommunicated, then tortured, and then burned. But Cicely, whom he had thought to frighten, never winced. "If so, so let it be," she replied, "and I will bear all as best I can. I know nothing of these jewels, but if they still exist they are mine, not yours, and I am innocent of any witchcraft. Do your work, for I am sure that the end shall be far other than you think." "What!" said the abbot, "has the foul fiend been with you again, that you talk thus certainly? Well, sorceress, soon you will sing another tune." And he went to the door, and summoned the prioress. "Put these women upon bread and water," he said, "and prepare them for the rack, that they may discover their accomplices." Mother Matilda set her gentle face, and answered, "It shall not be done in this nunnery, my lord abbot. I know the law, and you have no such power. Moreover, if you move them hence, who are my guests, I appeal to the king, and meanwhile raise the country on you." "Said I not that they had accomplices?" sneered the abbot, and went his way. But of the torture no more was heard, for that appeal to the king had an ill sound in his ears. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 11. Doomed. It was the day of trial. From dawn, Cicely and Emlyn had seen people hurrying in and out of the gates of the nunnery, and heard workmen making preparation in the guest hall below their chamber. About 8, one of the nuns brought them their breakfast. Her face was scared and white. She only spoke in whispers, looking behind her continually as though she knew she was being watched. Emlyn asked who their judges were, and she answered, "The abbot, a strange black-faced prior, and the old bishop. Oh, God help you, my sisters! God help us all!" And she fled away. Now for a moment Emlyn's heart failed her, since before such a tribunal what chance had they? The abbot was their bitter enemy and accuser, the strange prior, no doubt, one of his friends and kidney, while the ecclesiastic spoken of as the old bishop was well known as perhaps the cruelest man in England, a scourge of heretics, that is, before heresy became the fashion, a hunter out of witches and wizards, and a time-server to boot. But to Cicely she said nothing, for what was the use, seeing that soon she would learn all. They ate their food, knowing both of them that they would need strength. Then Cicely nursed her child, and, placing it in Emmeline's arms, knelt down to pray. While she was still praying, the door opened, and a procession appeared. First came 2 monks, then 6 armed men of the abbot's guard, then the prioress and 3 of her nuns. At the sight of the beautiful young woman kneeling at her prayers, the guards, rough men though they were, stopped, as if unwilling to disturb her. But one of the monks cried brutally, "Seize the accursed hypocrite, and if she will not come, drag her with you," at the same time stretching out his hand as though to grasp her arm. But Cicely rose and faced him, saying, "Do not touch me, I follow. Emmeline, give me the child and let us go." So they went in the midst of the armed men, the monks preceding, the nuns, with bowed heads, following after. Presently they entered the large hall, but on its threshold were ordered to pause while way was made for them. Cicely never forgot the sight of it as it appeared that day. The lofty, arched roof of rich chestnut wood, set there hundreds of years before by hands that spared neither work nor timber, amongst the beams of which the bright light of morning played so clearly that she could see the spiders' webs, and in one of them a sleepy autumn wasp caught fast. The mob of people gathered to watch her public trial, faces, many of them, that she had known from childhood. How they stared at her as she stood there by the head of the steps, her sleeping child held in her arms. They were a packed audience, and had been prepared to condemn her. That she could see and hear, for did not some of them point and frown, and set up a cry of "Witch!" as they had been told to do? But it died away. The sight of her, the daughter of one of their great men, and the widow of another, standing in her innocent beauty, the slumbering babe upon her breast, seemed to quell them, till the hardest faces grew pitiful, full of resentment too, some of them, but not against her. Then the 3 judges on the bench behind the table, at which sat the monkish secretaries, the hard-faced, hook-nosed old bishop in his gorgeous robes and mitre, his crozier resting against the panelling behind him, peering about him with beady eyes. The sullen, heavy-jawed prior, from some distant county, on his left, clad in a simple black gown with a girdle about his waist, and on the right Clement Malden, abbot of Blossholme, an enemy of her house, suave, olive-faced, foreign-looking, his black, uneasy eyes observing all, his keen ears catching every word and murmur as he whispered something to the bishop that caused him to smile grimly. Lastly, placed already in the roped space, and guarded by a soldier, poor old Bridget, the half-witted, who was gabbling words to which no one paid any heed. The path was clear now, and they were ordered to walk on. Halfway up the hall, something red attracted Cicely's attention, and, glancing round, she saw that it was the beard of Thomas Bull. Their eyes met, and his were full of fear. In an instant she understood that he dreaded lest he should be betrayed, and given over to some awful doom. "Fear nothing," she whispered as she passed, and he heard her, or perhaps Emmeline's glance told him that he was safe. At least, a sigh of relief broke from him. Now they had entered the roped space, and stood there. "Your name?" asked one of the secretaries, pointing to Cicely with the feather of his quill. "All know it. It is Cicely Harfleet," she answered gently, whereon the clerk said roughly that she lied, and the old wrangle began again as to the validity of her marriage, the abbot maintaining that she was still Cicely Fotterel, the mother of a base-born child. Into this argument the bishop entered with some zest, asking many questions, and seeming more or less to take her side, since, where matters of religion were not concerned, he was a keen lawyer, and just enough. At length, however, he swept the thing away, remarking brutally that if half he had heard were true, soon the name by which she had last been called in life would not concern her, and bade the clerks write her down as Cicely Harfleet or Fotterel. Then Emmeline gave her name, and Sister Bridget's was written without question. Next the charge against them was read. It was long and technical, mixed up with Latin words and phrases, and all that Cicely made out of it was that they were accused of many horrible crimes, and of having called up the devil and consorted with him in the shape of a monster with horns and hoofs, and of her father's ghost. When it was finished, they were commanded to answer, and pleaded not guilty, or rather Cicely and Emmeline did, for Bridget broke into a long tale that could not be followed. She was ordered to be silent, after which no one took any more heed of what she said. Now the bishop asked whether these women had been put to the question, and when he was told no, said that it seemed a pity, as evidently they were stubborn witches, and some discipline of the sort might have saved trouble. Again he asked if the witches' marks had been found on them, that is, the spot where the devil had sealed their bodies, on which, as was well known, his chosen could feel no pain. He even suggested that the trial should be adjourned until they had been pricked all over with a nail to find this spot, but ultimately gave up the point to save time. A last question was raised by the beetle-browed prior, who submitted that the infant ought also to be accused, since he, too, was said to have consorted with the devil, having, according to the story, been rescued from death by him, and afterwards been carried in his arms and given to the nun Bridget, which was the only evidence against the said Bridget. If she was guilty, why then was the infant innocent? Ought not they to burn together, since a babe that had been nursed by the evil one was obviously damned? The legal-minded bishop found this argument interesting, but ultimately decided that it was safer to overrule it on account of the tender age of the criminal. He added that it did not matter, since doubtless the foul fiend would claim his own ere long. Lastly, before the witnesses were called, Emlyn asked for an advocate to defend them, but the bishop replied with a chuckle that it was quite unnecessary, since already they had the best of all advocates, Satan himself. "True, my lord," said Cicely, looking up. "We have the best of all advocates, only you have misnamed him. The God of the innocent is our advocate, and in him I trust." "Blaspheme not, sorceress!" shouted the old man, and the evidence commenced. To follow it in detail is not necessary, and, indeed, would be long, for it took many hours. First of all, Emlyn's early life was set out, much being made of the fact that her mother was a gypsy who had committed suicide, and that her father had fallen under the ban of the Inquisition, an heretical work of his having been publicly burned. Then the abbot himself gave evidence, since, where the charge was sorcery, no one seemed to think it strange that the same man should both act as judge and be the principal witness for the prosecution. He told of Cicely's wild words after the burning of Cranwell Towers, from which burning she and her familiar, Emlyn, had evidently escaped by magic, without the aid of which it was plain they could not have lived. He told of Emlyn's threats to him after she had looked into the bowl of water, of all the dreadful things that had been seen and done at Blossholme, which no doubt these witches had brought about. Here he was right, though how he knew not. He told of the death of the midwife, and of the appearance which she presented afterwards, a tale that caused his audience to shudder. And, lastly, he told of the vision of the ghost of Sir John Fotterel holding converse with the two accused in the chapel of the nunnery, and its vanishing away. When at length he had finished, Emlyn asked leave to cross-examine him, but this was refused on the ground that persons accused of such crimes had no right to cross-examine. Then the court adjourned for a while to eat, some food being brought for the prisoners, who were forced to take it where they stood. Worse still, Cicely was driven to nurse her child in the presence of all that audience, who stared and jibed at her rudely, and were angry because Emlyn and some of the nuns stood round her to form a living screen. When the judges returned, the evidence went on. Though most of it was entirely irrelevant, its volume was so great that at length the old bishop grew weary, and said he would hear no more. Then the judges went on to put, first to Cicely and afterwards to Emlyn, a series of questions of a nature so abominable that after denying the first of them indignantly, they stood silent, refusing to answer. Proof positive of their guilt, as the black-browed prior remarked in triumph. Lastly, these hideous queries being exhausted, Cicely was asked if she had anything to say. "Somewhat," she answered, "but I am weary and must be brief. I am no witch. I do not know what it means. The abbot of Blossholme, who sits as my judge, is my grievous enemy. He claimed my father's lands, which lands I believe he now holds, and cruelly murdered my said father by Kingsgrave Mount in the forest, as he was riding to London to make complaint of him and reveal his treachery to his grace the king and his council." "It is a lie, witch," broke in the abbot, but taking no heed, Cicely went on. "Afterwards He and his hired soldiers attacked the house of my husband, Sir Christopher Harfleet, and burnt it, slaying, or striving to slay, I know not which, my said husband, who is vanished away. Then he imprisoned me and my servant, Emlyn Stower, in this nunnery, and strove to force me to sign papers conveying all my own and my child's property to him. This I refused to do, and therefore it is that he puts me on my trial, because, as I am told, those who are found guilty of witchcraft are stripped of all their possessions, which those take who are strong enough to keep them. Lastly, I deny the authority of this court, and appeal to the king, who soon or late will hear my cry and avenge my wrongs, and maybe my murder, upon those who wrought them. Good people all, hear my words. I appeal to the king, and to him under God above I entrust my cause, and, should I die, the guardianship of my orphan son, whom the abbot sent his creature to murder, his vile creature, upon whose head fell the Almighty's justice, as it will fall on yours, you slaughterers of the innocent." So spoke Cicely, and, having spoken, worn out with fatigue and misery, sank to the floor. For all these hours there had been no stool for her to sit on, and crouched there, still holding her child in her arms, a piteous sight indeed, which touched even the superstitious hearts of the crowd who watched her. Now this appeal of hers to the king seemed to scare the fierce old bishop, who turned, and began to argue with the abbot. Cicely, listening, caught some of his words, such as, "On your head be it, then. I judge only of the cause ecclesiastic, and shall direct it to be so entered upon the records. Of the execution of the sentence or the disposal of the property I wash my hands. See you to it." "So spoke Pilate," broke in Cicely, lifting her head and looking him in the eyes. Then she let it fall again, and was silent. Now Emlyn opened her lips, and from them burst a fierce torrent of words. "Do you know," she began, "who and what is the Spanish priest who sits to judge us of witchcraft? Well, I will tell you. Years ago he fled from Spain because of hideous crimes that he had committed there. Ask him of Isabella the nun, who was my father's cousin, and her end and that of her companions. Ask him of—" At this point a monk, to whom the abbot had whispered something, slipped behind Emlyn and threw a cloth over her face. She tore it away with her strong hands and screamed out, "He is a murderer! He is a traitor! He plots to kill the king! I can prove it, and that's why Fothergill died, because he knew—" The abbot shouted something, and again the monk, a stout fellow named Ambrose, got the cloth over her mouth. Once more she wrenched herself loose, and turning towards the people, called, "Have I never a friend who had befriended so many? Is there no man in Blossholme who will avenge me of this brute Ambrose? Aye, I see some." Then this Ambrose, and others aiding him, fell upon her, striking her on the head and choking her, till at length she sank, half stunned and gasping, to the ground. Now, after a hurried word or two with his colleagues, the bishop sprang up, and as darkness gathered in the hall, for the sun had set, pronounced the sentence of the court. First he declared the prisoners to be guilty of the foulest witchcraft. Next he excommunicated them with much ceremony, delivering their souls to their master, Satan. Then, incidentally, he condemned their bodies to be burnt, without specifying when, how, or by whom. Out of the gloom a clear voice spoke, saying, "You exceed your powers, priest, and usurp those of the king. Beware!" A tumult followed, in which some cried, "Aye," and some, "Nay," and when at length it died down, the bishop, or it may have been the abbot, for none could see who spoke, exclaimed, "The church guards her own rights. Let the king see to his." He will," answered the same voice. "The Pope is in his bag. Monks, your day is done." Again there was tumult, a very great tumult. In truth the scene, or rather the sounds, were strange. The bishop shrieking with rage upon the bench, like a hen that has been caught upon her perch at night, the black-browed prior bellowing like a bull, the populace surging and shouting this and that, the secretary calling for candles, and when at length one was brought, making a little star of light in that huge gloom, putting his hand to his mouth and roaring, "What of this Bridget? Does she go free?" The bishop made no answer. It seemed as though he were frightened at the forces which he had let loose, but the abbot hallooed back, "Burn the hag with the others!" and the secretary wrote it down upon his brief. Then the guards seized the three of them to lead them away, and the frightened babe set up a thin, piercing wail, while the bishop and his companions, preceded by one of the monks bearing a candle, It was that Ambrose who had choked Emlyn, marched in procession down the hall to gain the great door. Ere ever they reached it, the candle was dashed from the hand of Ambrose, and a fearful tumult arose in the dense darkness, for now all light had vanished. There were screams, and sounds of fighting, and cries for help. These died away. The hall emptied by degrees, for it seemed that none wished to stay there. Torches were lit, and showed a strange scene. The bishop, the abbot, and the foreign prior lay here and there, buffeted, bleeding, their robes torn off them, so that they were almost naked, while by the bishop was his crozier, broken in two, apparently across his own head. Worst of all, the monk Ambrose leaned against the pillar. His feet seemed to go forward, but his face looked backward, for his neck was twisted like that of a Michaelmas goose. The bishop looked about him, and felt his hurts. Then he called to his people, "Bring me my cloak and a horse, for I have had enough of Blossholme and its wizardries. Settle your own matters henceforth, Abbot Malden, for in them I find no luck." And he glanced at his broken staff. Thus ended the great trial of the Blossholme witches. Cicely had sunk to sleep at last, and Emlyn watched her, for, since there was nowhere else to put them, they were back in their own room, but guarded by armed men, lest they should escape. Of this, as Emlyn knew well, there was little chance, for even if they were once outside the priory walls, how could they get away without friends to help, or food to eat, or horses to carry them? They would be run down within a mile. Moreover, there was the child, which Cicely would never leave, and after all she had undergone, she herself was not fit to travel. Therefore it was that Emlyn sat sleepless, full of bitter wrath and fear, for she could see no hope. All was black as the night about them. The door opened, and was shut and locked again. Then, from behind the curtain, appeared the tall figure of the prioress, carrying a candle that made a star of light upon the shadows. As she stood there, holding it up, and looking about her, something came into Emlyn's mind. Perhaps she would help, she who loved Cicely. Did she not look like a figure of hope, with her sweet face, and her taper in the gloom? Emlyn advanced to meet her, her finger on her lips. "She sleeps, wake her not," she said. "Have you come to tell us that we burn tomorrow?" "Nay, Emlyn, the old bishop has commanded that it shall not be for a week. He would have time to get across England first. Indeed, had it not been for the beating of him in the dark, and the twisting of the neck of Brother Ambrose, I believe that he would not have suffered it at all, for fear of trouble afterwards. But now he is full of rage, and swears that he was set on by evil spirits in the hall, and that those who loose them shall not live. Emlyn, who killed Father Ambrose? Was it men, or—" "Men, I think, mother. The devil does not twist necks, except in monkish dreams. Is it wonderful that my lady, the greatest lady of all these parts, and the most foully treated, should have friends left to her? Why, if they were not curs, ere now her people would have pulled that abbey stone from stone, and cut the throat of every man within its walls." "Emlyn," said the prioress again, "in the name of Jesus and on your soul, tell me true, is there witchcraft in all this business? And if not, what is its meaning?" "As much witchcraft as dwells in your gentle heart, no more. A man did these things. I'll not give you his name, lest it should be wrung from you. A man wore Fotherell's armor, and came here by a secret hole to take counsel with us in the chapel. A man burnt the abbey dormers in the stacks, and harried the beast with a goat skin on his head, and dragged the skull of drunken Andrew from his grave. Doubtless it was his hand also that twisted Ambrose's neck, because he struck me." The two women looked each other in the eyes. "Ah," said the prioress, "I think I can guess now, but, Emlyn, you choose rough tools. Well, fear not, your secret is safe with me." She paused a moment, then went on. "Oh, I am glad, who feared lest the fiend's finger was in it all, as, in truth, they believe. Now I see my path clear, and will follow it to the death. Yes, yes, I will save you all, or die." "What path, mother?" "Emlyn, you have heard no tidings for these many months, but I have. Listen, there is much afoot. The king, or the Lord Cromwell, or both, make war upon the lesser houses, dissolving them, seizing their goods, turning the religious out of them upon the world to starve. His Grace sends royal commissioners to visit them, and be judge and jury both. They were coming here, but I have friends, and some fortune of my own, who was not born meanly or ill-dowered, and I found a way to buy them off." One of these commissioners, Thomas Lay, as I heard only today, makes inquisition at the monastery of Bayfleet, in Yorkshire, some 80 miles away, of which my cousin, Alfred Stuckley, whose letter reached me this morning, is the prior. Emlyn, I'll go to this rough man, for rough he is, they say. Old and feeble as I am, I'll seek him out and offer up the ancient house I rule to save your life and Cicely's, yes, and Bridget's also. You will go, mother? Oh, God's blessing be on you! But how will you go? They will never suffer it. The old nun drew herself up, and answered, Who has the right to say to the Prioress of Blossholme that she shall not travel whither she will? No Spanish abbot, I think. Why, but now that proud priest's servants would have forbidden me to enter your chamber in my own house, but I read them a lesson they will not forget. Also I have horses at my command, but it is true I need an escort, who am not too strong, and little versed in the ways of the outside world, where I have scarcely strayed for many years. Now I have bethought me of that red-haired lay-brother, Thomas Bowl. I am told that though foolish, he is a valiant man, whom few care to face. Moreover, that he understands horses, and knows all roads. Do you think, Emlyn Stower, that Thomas Bowl will be my companion on this journey, with leave from the abbot, or without it? And again she looked her in the eyes. He might. He is a venturous man, or so I remember him in my youth, answered Emlyn. Moreover, his forefathers have served the Harfleets and the Fodderels for generations in peace and war, and doubtless, therefore, he loves my lady yonder. But the trouble is to get at him. No trouble at all, Emlyn. He is one of the watch outside the gate. But, woman, what token? Emlyn thought for a moment, then drew a ring off her finger, in which was set a cornelian heart. Give him this, she said, and say that the wearer bade him follow the bearer to the death, for the sake of that wearer's life and another's. He is a simple soul, and if the abbot does not catch him first, I believe that he will go. Mother Matilda took the ring, and set it on her own finger. Then she walked to where Cicely lay sleeping, looked at her and the boy upon her breast. Stretching out her thin hands, she called down the blessing and protection of Almighty God upon them both, then turned to depart. Emlyn caught her by the robe. Stay, she said. You think I do not understand, but I do. You are giving up everything for us. Even if you live through it, this house, which has been your charge for many years, will be dissolved. Your sheep will be scattered to starve in their toothless age. The fold that has sheltered them for 400 years will become a home of wolves. I understand full well, and she, pointing to the sleeping Cicely, will understand also. Say nothing to her, murmured Mother Matilda. I may fail. You may fail, or you may succeed. If you fail and we burn, God shall reward you. If you succeed and we are saved, on her behalf I swear that you shall not suffer. There is wealth hidden away, wealth worth many priories. You and yours shall have your share of it, and that commissioner shall not go lacking. Tell him that there is some small store to pay him for his trouble, and that the abbot of Blossholme would rob him of it. Now, my Lady Margaret, for that, I think, used to be your name, and will be again when you have done with priests and nuns. Bless me also and be gone, and know that, living or dead, I hold you great and holy. So the prioress blessed her ere she glided thence in her stately fashion, and the oaken door opened and shut behind her. 3 days later the abbot visited them alone. Foul and accursed witches, he said, I come to tell you that next Monday at noon you burn upon the green in front of the abbey gate, who, were it not for the mercy of the church, should have been tortured also till you discovered your accomplices, of whom I think that you have many. Show me the king's warrant for this slaughter, said Cicely. I will show you nothing save the stake, witch. Repent, repent, ere it be too late. Hell and its eternal fires yawn for you. Do they yawn for my child also, my lord abbot? Your brat will be taken from you ere you enter the flames and laid upon the ground, since it is baptized and too young to burn. If any have pity on it, good. If not, where it lies, there it will be buried. So be it, answered Cicely. God gave it, God save it. In God I put my trust. Murderer, leave me to make my peace with him. And she turned and walked away. Now the abbot and Emlyn were face to face. Do we really burn on Monday? She asked. Without doubt, unless faggots will not take fire. Yet, he added slowly, if certain jewels should chance to be found and handed over, the case might be remitted to another court. And the torment prolonged. My lord abbot, I fear that those jewels will never be found. Well, then you burn, slowly perhaps, for much rain has fallen of late, and the wood is green. They say the death is dreadful. Doubtless one day you will find it so, Clement Maldonado, here or hereafter, but of that we will talk together when all is done, of that and many other things. I mean before the judgment seat of God. Nay, I do not threaten after your fashion. It shall be so. Meanwhile, I ask the boon of a dying woman. There are two whom I would see, the Prioress Matilda, in whose charge I desire to leave a certain secret, and Thomas Bowl, a lay brother in your abbey, a man who once engaged himself to me in marriage. For your own sake deny me not these favours. They should be granted readily enough, were it in my power, but it is not, answered the abbot, looking at her curiously, for he thought that to them she might tell what she had refused to him, the hiding-place of the jewels, which afterwards he could wring out. Why not, my lord abbot? Because the prioress has gone hence, secretly, upon some journey of her own, and Thomas Bowl has vanished away I know not where. If they, or either of them, return ere Monday, you shall see them. And if they do not return, I shall see them afterwards, replied Emmeline, with a shrug of her shoulders. What does it matter? Fare you well till we meet at the fire, my lord abbot. On the Sunday, that is, the day before the burning, the abbot came again. 3 days ago, he said, addressing them both, I offered you a chance of life upon certain conditions, but, obstinate wishes that you are, you refused to listen. Now I offer you the last boon in my power, not life indeed, it is too late for that, but a merciful death. If you will give me what I seek, the executioner shall dispatch you both before the fire bites, never mind how. If not, well, as I have told you, there has been much rain, and they say the faggots are somewhat green. Cicely paled a little. Who would not, even in those cruel days? Then asked, And what is it that you seek, or that we can give? A confession of our guilt, to cover up your crime in the eyes of the world? If so, you shall never have it, though we burn by inches. Yes, I see that, but for your own sakes, not for mine, since those who confess and repent may receive absolution. Also I seek more, the rich jewels which you have in hiding, that they may be used for the purposes of the church. Then it was that Cicely showed the courage of her blood. Never, never, she cried, turning on him with eyes ablaze. Torture me and slay me if you will, but my wealth you shall not thieve. I know not where these jewels are, but wherever they may be, there let them lie till my heirs find them, or they rot. The abbot's face grew very evil. Is that your last word, Cicely Fothergill? He asked. She bowed her head, and he repeated the question to Emmeline, who answered, What my mistress says, I say. So be it, he exclaimed. Doubtless you sorceresses put your trust in the devil. Well, we shall see if he will help you tomorrow. God will help us, replied Cicely in a quiet voice. Remember my words when the time comes. Then he went. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 12. The Stake. It was an awful night. Let those who have followed this history think of the state of these two women, one of them still but a girl, who on the morrow, amidst the jeers and curses of superstitious men, were to suffer the cruelest of deaths for no crime at all, unless the traffickings of Emmeline with Thomas Bowl, in which Cicely had small share, could be held a crime. Well, thousands quite as blameless were called on to undergo that, and even worse fates, in the days which some name good and old, the days of chivalry and gallant knights, when even little children were tormented and burned by holy and learned folk who feared a visible, or at least a tangible, devil and his works. Doubtless their cruelty was that of terror. Doubtless, although he had other ends to gain which to him were sacred, the Abbot Maldon did believe that Cicely and Emmeline had practised horrible witchcraft, that they had conversed with Satan in order to revenge themselves upon him, and therefore were too foul to live. The old bishop believed it also, and so did the black-browed prior, and the most of the ignorant people who lived around, and knew of the terrible things which had happened in Blossholme. Had not some of them actually seen the fiend, with horns and hoofs and tail, driving the abbey cattle? And had not others met the ghost of Sir John Fotterel, which doubtless was but that fiend in another shape? Oh, these women were guilty. Without doubt they were guilty, and deserved the stake. What did it matter if the husband and father of one of them had been murdered, and the other had suffered grievous but forgotten wrongs? Compared to witchcraft, murder was but a light and homely crime, one that would happen when men's passions and needs were involved, quite a familiar thing. It was an awful night. Sometimes Cicely slept a little, but the most of it she spent in prayer. The fierce Emlyn neither slept nor prayed, except once or twice that vengeance might fall upon the abbot's head, for her whole soul was up in arms, and it galled her to think that she and her beloved mistress must die shamefully while their enemy lived on triumphant and in honor. Even the infant seemed nervous and disturbed, as though some instinct warned it of terror at hand, for although it was well enough, against its custom it woke continually and wailed. "Emlyn," said Cicely towards morning, but before the light had come, after at length she had soothed it to rest, "do you think that Mother Matilda will be able to help us?" "No, no, put it from your mind, dearie. She is weak and old, the road is rough and long, and mayhap she has never reached the place. It was a great venture for her to try such a journey, and if she came there, why, perhaps the commissioner man had gone, or perhaps he will not listen, or perhaps he cannot come. What would he care about the burning of 2 witches 100 miles away, this leech who is sucking himself full upon the carcass of some fat monastery? No, no, never count on her." "At least she is brave and true, Emlyn, and has done her best, for which may heaven's blessing rest upon her always. Now, what of Thomas Bowl?" "Nothing, except that he is a red-headed jackass that can bray but daren't kick," answered Emlyn viciously. "Never speak to me of Thomas Bowl. Had he been a man long ago, he'd have broken the neck of that rogue abbot instead of dressing himself up like a he-goat and hunting his cows." "If what they say is true, he did break the neck of Father Ambrose," replied Cicely, with a faint smile. "Perhaps he made a mistake in the dark." "If so, it is like Thomas Bowl, whoever wished the right thing and did the wrong. Talk no more of him, since I would not meet my end in a bad spirit. Thomas Bowl, who lets us die for his elvish pranks. A pest on the half-witted cur, say I, and after I had kissed him, too." Cicely wondered vaguely to what she referred, then, thinking it well not to inquire, said, "Not so. A blessing on him, say I, who saved my child from that hateful hag." Then there was silence for a while, the matter of poor Thomas Bowl and his conduct being exhausted between them, who indeed were in no mood for argument about people whom they would never see again. At last Cicely spoke once more through the darkness. "Emlyn, I will try to be brave, but once, do you remember, I burnt my hand as a child when I stole the sweetmeats from the cooling pot, and, it hurt me. I will try to die as those who went before me would have died, but if I should break down, think not the less of me, for the spirit is willing, though the flesh be weak." Emlyn ground her teeth in silence, and Cicely went on, "But that is not the worst of it, Emlyn. A few minutes, and it will be over, and I shall sleep, as I think, to awake elsewhere. Only, if Christopher should really live, how he will mourn when he learns—" "I pray that he does," broke in Emlyn, "for then ere long there will be a Spanish priest the less on earth, and one more in hell." "And the child, Emlyn, the child," she went on in a trembling voice, not heeding the interruption. "What will become of my son, the heir to so much if he had his rights, and yet so friendless? They'll murder him also, Emlyn, or let him die, which is the same thing, since how otherwise will they get title to his lands and goods?" "If so, his troubles will be done, and he will be better with you in heaven," Emlyn answered, with a dry sob. "The boy and you in heaven midst the blessed saints, and the abbot and I in hell, setting our score there with the devil for company. That's all I ask. There, I blaspheme, for injustice makes me mad. It clogs my heart, and I throw it up in bitter words, for your sake, dear, and his, not my own. Child, you are good and gentle. To such as you the ear of God is open. Call to him, ask for light. He will not refuse. Do you remember in the fire at the Towers, when we crouched in that vault, and the walls crumbled overhead? You said you saw his angel bending over us and heard his speech. Call to him, Cicely, and if he will not listen, hear me. I have a means of death about me. Ask not what it is, but if at the end I turn on you and strike, blame me not here or hereafter, for it will be love's blow, my last service." It seemed as though Cicely did not understand those heavy words. At the least, she took no heed of them. "I'll pray again," she whispered, "though I fear that heaven's doors are closed to me. No light comes through." And she knelt down. For long, long she prayed, till at length weariness overcame her, and Emmeline heard her breathing softly like one asleep. "Let her sleep," she murmured to herself. "Oh, if I were sure, she should never wake again to see the dawn. I have half a mind to do it, but there it is, I am not sure. If there is a God, he will never suffer such a thing. I'd have paid the jewels, but what's the use? They would have killed her all the same, for else where's their title? No, my heart bids me wait." Cicely awoke. "Emmeline," she said in a low, thrilling voice. "Do you hear me, Emmeline? The angel has been with me again. He spoke to me." And she paused. "Well, well, what did he say?" "I don't know, Emmeline," she answered, confused. "It has gone from me. But, Emmeline, have no fear. All is well with us, and not only with us, but with Christopher and the babe also. Oh, yes, with Christopher and the babe also." And she let her fair head fall upon the couch, and burst into a flood of happy tears. Then, rising, she took up the child and kissed it, laid herself down, and slept sweetly. Just then the dawn broke, a glorious dawn, and Emmeline held out her arms to it in an ecstasy of gratitude. For with that light her terror passed away as the darkness passed. She believed that God had spoken to Cicely, and for a while her heart was at peace. When about 8 o'clock that morning the door was opened to allow a nun to bring them their food, she saw a sight which filled her with amazement. Her own eyes, poor woman, were red with tears, for, like all in the priory, she loved Cicely, whom as a child she had nursed on her knee, and with the other sisters had spent a sleepless night in prayer for her, for Emmeline, and for Bridget, who was to be burned with them. She had expected to find the victims prostrate, and perhaps senseless with fear, but behold! There they sat together, in the window-place, dressed in their best garments, and talking quietly. Indeed, as she entered, one of them, it was Cicely, laughed a little at something that the other had said. "Good morning to you, Sister Mary," said Cicely. "Tell me now, has the prioress returned?" Nay, we know not where she is, no word has come from her." "Well, at least she will be spared a dreadful sight. Have you any message for her ear? If so, give it swiftly, ere the guards call me." "I thank you," said Cicely, "but I think that I shall be the bearer of my own messages." "What? Do you, then, mean that our mother is dead? Must we suffer woe upon woe? Oh, who could have told you these sorrowful tidings?" "No, sister, I think that she is alive, and that I, yet living, shall talk with her again." Sister Mary looked bewildered, for how, she wondered, could close prisoners know these things? Staring round to see that she was not observed, she thrust 2 little packets into Cicely's hand. "Wear these at the last, both of you," she whispered. "Whatever they say, we believe you innocent, and for your sake we have done a great crime. Yes, we have opened the reliquary and taken from it our most precious treasure, a fragment of the cord that bound St. Catherine to the wheel, and divided it into 3, 1 strand for each of you. Perhaps, if you are really guiltless, it will work a miracle. Perhaps the fire will not burn, or the rain will extinguish it, or the abbot may relent." "That last will be the greatest miracle of all," broke in Emmeline, with grim humour. "Still, we thank you from our hearts, and will wear the relics, if they do not take them from us. Hark, they are calling you. Farewell, and all blessings be on your gentle heads." Again the loud voices of the guards called, and Sister Mary turned and fled, wondering if these women were not witches, how it came about that they could be so brave, so different from poor Bridget, who wailed and moaned in her cell below. Cicely and Emmeline ate their food with good appetite, knowing that they would need support that day, and when it was done sat themselves again by the window-place, through which they could see hundreds of people, mounted and on foot, passing up the slope that led to the green in front of the abbey, though this green they could not see because of a belt in the trees. "Listen," said Emmeline presently. "It is hard to say, but it may be that your vision of the night was but a merciful dream, and if so, within a few hours we shall be dead. Now I have the secret of the hiding-place of those jewels, which, without me, none can ever find. Shall I pass it on, if I get the chance, to one whom I can trust? Some good soul, the nuns perhaps, will surely shelter your boy, and he might need them in days to come." Cicely thought a while, then answered, "Not so, Emmeline. I believe that God has spoken to me by his angel, as he spoke to Peter in the prison. To do this would be to tempt God, showing that we have no trust in him. Let that secret lie where it is, in your breast." "Great is your faith," said Emmeline, looking at her with admiration. "Well, I will stand or fall by it, for I think there is enough for 2. The convent bell chimed 10, and they heard a sound of feet and voices below. They come for us, said Emlyn. The burning is set for 11, that after the sight folk may get away in comfort to their dinners. Now summon that great faith of yours, and hold him fast for both our sakes, since mine grows faint. The door opened, and through it came monks, followed by guards, the officer of whom bade them rise and follow. They obeyed without speaking, Cicely throwing her cloak about her shoulders. You'll be warm enough without that, witch, said the man, with a hideous chuckle. Sir, she answered, I shall need it to wrap my child in when we are parted. Give me the babe, Emlyn. There, now we are ready. Nay, no need to lead us. We cannot escape, and shall not vex you. God's truth, the girl is spirit, muttered the officer to his companions, but one of the priests shook his head and answered, Witchcraft. Satan will leave them presently. A few more minutes, and, for the first time during all those weary months, they passed the gate of the priory. Here the third victim was waiting to join them, poor old half-witted Bridget, clad in a kind of sheet, for her habit had been stripped off. She was wild-eyed, and her grey locks hung loose about her shoulders, as she shook her ancient head and screamed prayers for mercy. Cicely shivered at the sight of her, which indeed was dreadful. Peace, good Bridget, she said as they passed. Being innocent, what have you to fear? The fire, the fire, cried the poor creature. I dread the fire. Then they were led to their place in the procession, and saw no more of Bridget for a while, although they could not escape the sound of her lamentations behind them. It was a great procession. First went the monks and choristers, singing a melancholy Latin dirge. Then came the victims in the midst of a guard of 12 armed men, and after these the nuns, who were forced to be present, while behind and about were all the folk for 20 miles round, a crowd without number. They crossed the footbridge, where stood the Ford Inn, for which the flounder had bargained as the price of murder. They walked up the rise by the right-of-way, muddy now with the autumn rains, and through the belt of trees where Thomas Bull's secret passage had its exit, and so came at last to the green in front of the towering abbey portal. Here a dreadful sight awaited them, for on this green were planted 3 14-inch posts of new-felled oak, 6 feet or more in height, such as no fire would easily burn through, and around each of them a kind of bower of faggots, open to the front. Moreover, to the posts hung new wagon chains, and nearby stood the village blacksmith and his apprentice, who carried a hand anvil and a sledge-hammer for the cold welding of those chains. At a distance from these stakes the procession was halted. Then out from the gate of the abbey came the abbot in his robes and mitre, preceded by acolytes and followed by more monks. He advanced to where the condemned women stood and halted, while a friar stepped forward and read their sentence to them, of which, being in Latin or in crabbed legal words, they understood nothing at all. Then in sonorous tones he adjured them for the sake of their sinful souls to make full confession of their guilt, that they might receive pardon before they suffered in the flesh for their hideous crime of sorcery. To this invitation Cicely and Emlyn shook their heads, saying that being innocent of any sorceries they had nothing to confess. But old Bridget gave another answer. She declared in a high, screaming voice that she was a witch, as her mother and grandmother had been before her. She described, while the crowd listened with intense interest, how Emlyn Stower had introduced her to the devil, who was clad in red hose, and looked like a black boy with a hump on his back, and a tuft of red hair hanging from his nose, also many unedifying details of her interviews with this same fiend. Asked what he said to her, she answered that he told her to bewitch the abbot of Blossholme, because he was such a holy man that God had need of him, and he did too much good upon the earth. Also he prevented Emlyn Stower and Cicely Fotterill from working his, the devil's, will, and enabled them to keep alive the baby, who would be a great wizard. He told her, moreover, that midwife Meggs was an angel, here the crowd laughed, sent to kill the said infant, who really was his own child, as might be seen by its black eyebrows and cleft tongue, also its webbed feet, and that he would appear in the shape of the ghost of Sir John Fotterill to save it, and give it to her, which he did, saying the Lord's Prayer backwards, and that she must bring it up in the faith of the Pentagon. Thus the poor crazed thing raved on, while sentence by sentence a scribe wrote down her gibberish, causing her at last to make her mark to it, all of which took a very long time. At the end she begged that she might be pardoned and not burnt, But this, she was informed, was impossible. Thereon she became enraged, and asked why then had she been led to tell so many lies, if after all she must burn, a question at which the crowd roared with laughter. On hearing this, the priest, who was about to absolve her, changed his mind, and ordered her to be fastened to her stake, which was done by the blacksmith, with the help of his apprentice and his portable anvil. Still, her confession was solemnly read over to Cicely and Emlyn, who were asked whether, after hearing it, they still persisted in a denial of their guilt. By way of answer, Cicely lifted the hood from her boy's face, and showed that his eyebrows were not black, but light-colored. Also she bared his feet, passing her little finger between his toes, and asking them if they were webbed. Some of them answered, "No," but a monk roared, "What of that? Cannot Satan web and unweb?" Then he snatched the infant from Cicely's arms, and laid it down upon the stump of an oak that had been placed there to receive it, crying out, "Let this child live or die as God pleases." Some brute who stood by aimed a blow at it with a stick, yelling, "Death to the witch's brat!" But a big man, whom Emlyn recognized as one of old Sir John's tenants, caught the falling stick from his hand, and dealt him such a clout with it that he fell like a stone, and went for the rest of his life with but one eye, and the nose flattened on the side of his face. Thenceforward no one tried to harm the babe, who, as all know, because of what befell him on this day, went in after life by the nickname of Christopher Oakstump. The abbot's men stepped forward to tie Cicely to her stake, but ere they laid hands on her, she took off her wool-lined cloak, and threw it to the yeoman who had struck down the fellow with his own stick, saying, "Friend, wrap my boy in this, and guard him till I ask him from you again." "Aye, lady," answered the great man, bending his knee, "I have served the grandsire and the sire, and so I'll serve the son." And throwing aside the stick, he drew his sword, and set himself in front of the oak bowl where the infant lay. Nor did any venture to meddle with him, for they saw other men of a like sort ranging themselves about him. Now slowly enough the smith began to rivet the chain round Cicely. "Man," she said to him, "I have seen you shoe many of my father's nags. Who could have thought that you would live to use your honest skill upon his daughter?" On hearing these words, the fellow burst into tears, cast down his tools, and fled away, cursing the abbot. His apprentice would have followed, but him they caught, and forced to complete the task. Then Emlyn was chained up also, so that at length all was ready for the last terrible act of the drama. Now the head executioner, he was the abbey cook, placed some pine splinters to light in a brazier that stood near by, and while waiting for the word of command, remarked audibly to his mate that there was a good wind, and that the witches would burn briskly. The spectators were ordered back out of earshot, and went at last, some of them muttering sullenly to each other. For here the company could not be picked, as it had been at the trial, and the abbot noted anxiously that among them the victims had many friends. It was time the deed was done, ere their smouldering love and pity flowed out into bloody tumult, he thought to himself. So, advancing quickly, he stood in front of Emlyn, and asked her in a low voice if she still refused to give up the secret of the jewels, seeing that there was yet time for him to command that they should die mercifully, and not by the fire. "Let the mistress judge, not the maid," answered Emlyn in a steady voice. He turned, and repeated the question to Cicely, who replied, "Have I not told you? Never! Get you behind me, O evil man, and go, repent your sins ere it be too late." The abbot stared at her, feeling that such constancy and courage were almost superhuman. He had an acute, imaginative mind, which could fancy himself in like case, and what his state would be. Though he was in such haste, a great curiosity entered into him to know whence she drew her strength, which even then he tried to satisfy. "Are you mad or drugged, Cicely Fotherell?" he asked. "Do you not know how fire will feel when it eats up that delicate flesh of yours?" "I do not know, and I shall never know," she answered quietly. "Do you mean that you will die before it touches you, building on some promise of your master Satan?" "Yes, I shall die before fire touches me, but not here and now, and I build upon a promise from the master of us all in heaven." He laughed, a shrill, nervous laugh, and called out aloud to the people around, "This witch says that she will not burn, for heaven has promised it to her. Do you not, witch?" "Yes, I say so. Bear witness to my words, good people all," replied Cicely, in clear and ringing tones. "Well, we'll see," shouted the abbot. "Man, bring flame, and let heaven or hell help her if it can." The cook executioner blew at his brands, but he was nervous, or clumsy, and a minute or more went by before they flamed. At length one was fit for the task, and unwillingly enough he stooped to lift it up. Then it was in the midst of the intense silence, for of all that multitude none seemed even to breathe, and old Bridget, who had fainted, cried no more. A bull's voice was heard beyond the brow of the hill, roaring, "In the king's name, stay! In the king's name, stay!" All turned to look, and there between the trees appeared a white horse, its sides streaked with blood, that staggered rather than galloped towards them, and on the horse a huge, red-bearded man, clad in mail and holding in his hand a woodman's axe. "Fire the faggots!" shouted the abbot, but the cook, who was not by nature brave, had already let fall his torch, which went out on the damp ground. By now the horse was rushing through them, treading them underfoot. With great convulsive bounds it reached the ring, and as the rider leapt from its back, rolled over and lay there panting, for its strength was done. "It is Thomas Bull!" exclaimed a voice, while the abbot cried again, "Fire the faggots! Fire the faggots!" and a soldier ran to fetch another brand. But Thomas was before him. Snatching up the brazier by its legs, he smote downwards with it, so that the burning charcoal fell all about the soldier, and the iron cage remained fixed upon his head, shouting as he smote, "You sought fire, take it!" The man rolled upon the ground, screaming in pain and terror, till someone dragged the hot cage off his head, leaving his face barred like a grilled herring. None took further heed of what became of him, for now Thomas Bull stood in front of the stakes, waving his great axe, and repeating, "In the king's name, stay! In the king's name, stay!" "What mean you, knave?" exclaimed the furious abbot. "What I say, priest, one step nearer, and I'll split your crown." The abbot fell back, and Thomas went on, "A fodderel! A fodderel! A harfleet! A harfleet! O ye who have eaten their bread, come scatter these faggots and save their flesh. Who will stand with me against Malden and his butchers?" "I," answered voices, "and I, and I, and I." "And I too," hallooed the yeoman by the oak stump, "only I watch the child. Nay, by God, I'll bring it with me." And, snatching up the screaming babe under his left arm, he ran to him. On came the others also, hurling the faggots this way and that. "Break the chains!" roared Bull again, and somehow those strong hands did it. Indeed, the only hurt that Cicely took that day was from their hacking at these chains. They were loose. Cicely snatched the child from the yeoman, who was glad enough to be rid of it, having other work to do, for now the abbot's men-at-arms were coming on. "Ring the women round," roared Bull, "and strike home for Fodderel, strike home for Harfleet. Ah, priest's dog, in the king's name, this!" And the axe sank up to the haft into the breast of the captain, who had told Cicely that she would be warm enough that day without her cloak. Then there began a great fight. The party of Fodderel, of whom there may have been a score, captained by Bull, made a circle round the 3 green oak stakes, within which stood Cicely and Emlyn and old Bridget, still tied to her post, for no one had thought or found time to cut her loose. These were attacked by the abbot's guard, 30 or more of them, urged on by Malden himself, who was maddened by the rescue of his victims, and full of fear lest Cicely's words should be fulfilled, and she herself set down henceforth, not as a witch, but as a prophetess favoured by God. On came the soldiers, and were beaten back. Thrice they came on, and thrice they were beaten back with loss, for Bull's axe was terrible to face, and, now that they had found a leader, and their courage, the yeoman lads who stood with him were sturdy fighters. Also, tumult broke out among the hundreds who watched, some of them taking one side, and some the other, so that they fell upon each other with sticks, and stones, and fists, even the women joining in the fray, biting and tearing like bagged cats. The scene was hideous, and the sounds those of a sacked city, for many were hurt, and all gave tongue, while shrill and clear above this hateful music rose the yells of Bridget, who had awakened from her faint, and imagined all was over, and that she fathomed hell. Thrice the attackers were rolled back, but of those who defended 1/3 were down, and now the abbot took another counsel. "Bring bows," he cried, "and shoot them, for they have none." And men ran off to do his bidding. Then it was that Emlyn's wit came to their aid, for when Bull shook his red head and gasped out that he feared they were lost, since how could they fight against arrows, she answered, "If so, why stand here to be spitted, fool? Come, let us cut our way through ere the shafts begin to fly, and take refuge among the trees, or in the nunnery." "Women's counsel is good sometimes," said Bull. "Form up, Fodderels, and march." "Nay," broke in Cicely, "loose Bridget first, lest they should burn her after all. I'll not stir else." So Bridget was hacked free, and together with the wounded men, of whom there were several, dragged and supported thence. Then began a running fight, but one in which they still held their own. Yet they would have been overwhelmed at last, for the women and the wounded hampered them, had not help come. For as they hewed their path towards the belt of trees with the abbot's fierce fellows, some of whom were French or Spanish, hanging on their flanks, suddenly, in the gap where the roadway ran, appeared a horse galloping, and on it a woman, who clung to its mane with both hands, and after her many armed men. "Look, Emlyn, look!" exclaimed Cicely. "Who is that?" For she could not believe her eyes. "Who but Mother Matilda?" answered Emlyn, "and by the saints, she is a strange sight." A strange sight she was indeed, for her hood was gone, her hair, that was ever so neat, flew loose, her robe was ruckled up about her knees, the rosary and crucifix she wore streamed on the air behind her, and beat against her back, and her garb had burst open at the front. In short, never was holy aged prioress seen in such a state before. Down she came on them like a whirlwind, for her frightened horse scented its Blossholme stable, clinging grimly to her unaccustomed seat, and crying as she sped, "For God's love, stop this mad beast!" Bull caught it by the bridle, and threw it to its haunches, so that, its rider speeding on, flew over its head onto the broad breast of the yeoman who had watched the child, and there rested thankfully. For, as Mother Matilda said afterwards, with her gentle smile, never before did she know what comfort there was to be found in man. When at length she loosed her arms from about his neck, the yeoman stood her on her feet, saying that this was worse than the baby, and her wandering eyes fell upon Cicely. "So I am in time! Oh, never more will I revile that horse!" she exclaimed, and, sinking to her knees then and there, she gasped out some prayer of thankfulness. Meanwhile, those who followed her had reined up in front, and the abbot's soldiers, with the accompanying crowd, had halted behind, not knowing what to make of these strangers, so that Bull and his party, with the women, were now between the two. From among the newcomers rode out a fat, coarse man, with a pompous air, as of one who was accustomed to be obeyed, who inquired in a laboured voice, for he was breathless from hard riding, what all this turmoil meant. "Ask the Abbot of Blossholme," said someone, "for it is his work." "Abbot of Blossholme, that's the man I want," puffed the fat stranger. "Up here, Abbot of Blossholme, and give account of these doings. And you, fellows," he added to his escort, "range up and be ready, lest this said priest should prove contumacious." Now the abbot stepped forward with some of his monks, and, looking the horsemen up and down, said, "Who may it be that demands account so roughly of a consecrated abbot?" "A consecrated abbot, a consecrated peacock, a tumultuous, turbulent, traitorous priest, a Spanish rogue ruffler, who, I am told, keeps about him a band of bloody mercenaries, to break the king's peace, and slay loyal English folk. Well, consecrated abbot, I'll tell you who I am. I am Thomas Lay, his Grace's visitor and royal commissioner to inspect the houses called religious, and I am come hither upon complaint made by yonder prioress of Blossholme nunnery, as to your dealings with certain of his highness's subjects, whom, she says, you have accused of witchcraft, for purposes of revenge and unlawful gain. That is who I am, my fine fowl of an abbot." Now when he heard this pompous speech, the rage in Malden's face was replaced by fear, for he knew of this Dr. Lay and his mission, and understood what Thomas Bull had meant by his cry of, "In the king's name!" End of chapter 12.